I raised my son for 38 years. I changed his diapers, taught him to tie his shoes, held him through every fever and heartbreak. So when I discovered he was planning to kill me for insurance money, it didn't just break my heart. It shattered everything I thought I knew about being a mother. He and his wife thought I was just a poor seamstress living on Social Security. They had no idea I was sitting on a $145 million fortune from a fashion company I'd built decades ago. They thought my age made me defenseless. They thought my love made me blind. They were wrong on both counts. What I did next would destroy their lives and save mine. But it started with a choice every parent dreads: believing the worst about your own child. If that resonates with you, drop a comment and hit subscribe, because this story will stay with you. To understand how I got here, I need to take you back to the morning everything changed. This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me, what are you doing while you listen? Working, driving, cooking, or just taking a moment for yourself? I read every comment, and I'm truly glad you're here. Quick note: some details are fictionalized for storytelling. What matters is the message this story carries. When my son got married, I kept a $145 million secret sitting in my name. And watching his new bride's eyes sweep the reception hall like an appraiser, I knew I'd made the right choice. My name is Constance Whitaker. I'm 60 years old. And I spent 35 years running a small custom tailoring shop in a waterfront district most people had never heard of. My son Corbin, 38, operations director at a boutique hotel chain, stood at the altar in his tailored gray suit, looking every bit the man I'd raised him to be. His new bride Saskia, 32, who claimed to run a venture capital firm, swept down the aisle in a silk gown I'd privately thought was too expensive for someone who'd only known my son 6 months. Reverend Hayes, a silver-haired man in his 60s who'd officiated dozens of waterfront weddings, pronounced them husband and wife. The guests applauded. My granddaughter Hadley, 16 years old, from Corbin's first marriage, smiled at me from the third row, wearing the lavender dress I'd hemmed for her just last week. Nobody in this room knew about the fortune. Not Corbin, not his new bride, not a single guest under these elegant lights at the historic Charleston waterfront venue. The equity stake had come from Vincent Ashford 20 years ago. Shares in the fashion corporation my late husband Roland had helped build before his sudden heart attack 5 years earlier. Roland, who'd passed at 62, had been the one to introduce me to Vincent during a charity gala decades ago, never knowing that introduction would someday make me wealthy beyond anything our modest life had suggested. Was I wrong to keep the money hidden from my own son? Maybe, but I'd built a life teaching him that wealth earned meant more than wealth inherited, and I wasn't about to undermine that lesson by handing him a fortune he hadn't worked for. The tailoring shop had been enough. We'd been comfortable, careful, content. During the reception, I watched Saskia move through the crowd with practiced grace. She laughed at the right moments, touched arms with perfect timing, said all the things a bride should say. But her eyes told a different story. They lingered too long on the diamond bracelet worn by Corbin's former colleague. They cataloged the vintage champagne labels with the precision of someone making calculations. Something in the way she measured the room made my seamstress fingers itch. Like watching someone assess fabric they hadn't paid for yet. A mother's instinct is a physical thing. Mine coiled tight in my chest, warning me something fundamental was wrong with the woman now holding my son's hand. The band struck up their first dance. Something modern I didn't recognize. Corbin held Saskia close, spinning her under the chandeliers, while guests formed a circle to watch. She whispered something in his ear, smiling, but her eyes kept scanning the crowd, even as she moved in his arms. Looking for what? Evaluating whom? Then, for half a second, Saskia's eyes met mine across the candlelit reception hall. It wasn't hostility I saw in that brief glance. It wasn't jealousy or warmth or even the polite acknowledgement a new bride might offer her mother-in-law. It was something far colder. The look of someone measuring an obstacle, calculating its value, deciding whether to go around it or straight through it. The kind of assessment I'd seen in my own mirror when pricing expensive alterations. Except Saskia wasn't measuring fabric. She was measuring me. A shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I smiled back anyway, raised my champagne glass in a toast I didn't feel, and wondered what exactly I'd just seen in my new daughter-in-law's eyes. I wouldn't understand until 7 days later, when she showed up at my front door with a lawyer. The morning after my son's wedding, I picked up my grandmother's ceramic vase to dust the mantel, and the weight was wrong. For 30 years, I'd dusted this vase every Sunday morning without fail. My hands knew its heft the way a seamstress knows the drape of silk versus polyester, the way muscle memory holds truth that eyes can miss. The vase had sat on my mantel since the day Roland and I moved into this waterfront house. A family heirloom passed down through 3 generations of women who'd kept it safe through wars and depressions and all the small disasters that accumulate across a century. This wasn't right. I held it up to the window where Charleston's morning light could be brutal and honest. The glaze caught the sun with a glossiness that made my stomach drop. Real antique ceramics carry microscopic imperfections, like fingerprints. Tiny variations in the kiln-fired surface that department store replicas can never quite duplicate. I'd spent 35 years examining fabric under magnifying lenses, training my eyes to spot the difference between hand-stitched seams and machine precision. The skills translated. I carried the vase to my sewing room and retrieved the magnifying glass I used for inspecting buttonholes. Under magnification, the truth became undeniable. The manufacturer's mark on the bottom was the wrong font. Too crisp, too perfect. The pattern of tiny air bubbles in the glaze followed a mechanical regularity that handcrafted pottery never achieved. Even the weight distribution felt calculated rather than organic, like someone had tried to match specifications without understanding why those specifications existed. Someone had replaced my grandmother's vase with a convincing but ultimately detectable fake. How many other things in my home had been touched, measured, appraised by hands that had no right to them? I walked through my house with new eyes, checking the silver candlesticks that had been my mother's, the pearl brooch Roland gave me on our 20th anniversary, the antique sewing scissors I kept in their velvet case. Everything else seemed untouched, just the vase. Why just the vase? Because it was the most valuable item sitting in plain sight. The one thing a casual appraiser would recognize as genuinely old, genuinely worth stealing. The timeline settled into place with uncomfortable precision. The last time I'd held this vase, the real one, was the week before the wedding when Corbin had stopped by for coffee. I'd moved it to wipe down the mantel while he sat at my kitchen table talking about honeymoon plans I'd pretended to be excited about. That meant someone had entered my home, cataloged my possessions, and executed the swap sometime in the 5 days between that coffee and the wedding ceremony. The violation wasn't the theft itself, it was the confidence. Someone had walked through my home, assuming I was too old, too blind, too trusting to notice the substitution. They'd measured me the same way they'd measured my belongings and decided I wasn't worth the courtesy of caution. I thought about Saskia's eyes across the reception hall, that cold, appraising glance that had made me shiver. I thought about her claimed venture capital background that Corbin had never quite explained in detail. I thought about 6 months of courtship that had felt rushed, even by modern standards. And I thought about what it meant that someone had scouted my home before they'd even married into my family. I placed the fake face back on the mantel, positioning it at the exact angle it had sat for 3 decades. If someone thought I was blind enough to miss the substitution, I'd let them keep thinking it. The best way to catch a thief is to let them believe they've already won. 6 days later, they would show me exactly what they thought I was worth. 6 days after the wedding. A black Mercedes pulled into my driveway at 8 in the morning, and I knew before the doors opened that the thief had come to collect. Saskia emerged from the passenger side wearing designer sunglasses despite the covered porch shade, her heels clicking on the concrete like a countdown. A man stepped out of the driver's side, late 30s, navy suit, crisp as paper, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She didn't introduce him, didn't smile, Didn't take off those sunglasses. "This is Desmond Gallagher, attorney at law," she said, her voice flat and professional. "He has some papers for you." I stood in my house dress at the front door, coffee cup still in hand, genuinely confused by their cold formality. I thought maybe they needed a wedding gift receipt, or help with thank you cards, or some other normal request a daughter-in-law might make on a Tuesday morning. Desmond Gallagher dropped a thick manila envelope on my porch table like it weighed nothing. "You have exactly 96 hours to remove your personal belongings from this property, Mrs. Whitaker," he said, his tone suggesting he'd delivered this speech before and would deliver it again. "The house has been legally sold. The asset transfer is complete. You no longer have lawful right to occupy this residence. If you're still present Monday morning at 8 a.m., the sheriff will physically remove you." The words hit like a physical blow. I stared at him, then at Saskia, waiting for the punchline, the explanation, the terrible misunderstanding that would make sense of what I'd just heard. Saskia examined her fresh manicure, while a stranger told me I was about to lose the home I'd lived in for 30 years. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "I own this house. My husband and I bought it in 1996. I have the deed." "You had the deed," Desmond interrupted. "Check the documents. Power of attorney, signed by you, notarized, legal." This had to be wrong. My son couldn't know. There had to be some administrative error, some terrible confusion that a phone call could fix. They left without another word. The Mercedes backed out of my driveway with the same cold efficiency it had arrived with, and I stood on my porch holding a manila envelope that claimed to contain proof I'd given away my own home. My hands shook as I tore it open. Power of attorney documents, transfer paperwork, county filing stamps, all official, all legal, all bearing my signature at the bottom of every page. I carried the papers to my sewing room and pulled out the magnifying glass I'd used the week before to examine the fake vase, the one that had examined 10,000 hymns and could spot the difference between hand-stitched and machine-made from 3 feet away. The signature looked like mine. The loops, the slant, the way I crossed my T's, all perfect. Too perfect. I'd signed my name tens of thousands of times in 38 years of motherhood, and I knew how my hand moved across paper. This was art, not writing. The pen had hesitated at the curve of the W, a tremor so faint most people would miss it. But I'd spent 35 years watching thread tension, the microscopic variations that separated amateur work from professional craft. I knew the difference between natural flow and careful replication. The signature was forged, expertly, professionally, by someone who'd watched me sign permission slips and birthday cards and mortgage documents for nearly 4 decades. Someone who knew exactly how I formed each letter because he'd studied my handwriting his entire life. Only Corbin could have done this. I set the magnifying glass down on the sewing table, my hands no longer shaking. The loving mother who'd stood at his wedding 7 days ago died in that moment. What remained was something far colder, far more dangerous. And they had no idea I was about to become their worst nightmare. I carried the forged documents to my old sewing room where the afternoon light was unforgiving, spread them across the cutting table, and prepared to examine my son's crime the same way I'd once examined 10,000 imperfect hems. 35 years running a tailoring shop taught me one thing: the difference between authentic and counterfeit lives in the details, invisible to casual eyes. A hand-stitched seam looks identical to machine work until you understand the rhythm of the needle. A forged signature looks perfect until you know what natural handwriting actually feels like. I pulled my real signatures from last year's tax returns, documents Corbin had witnessed me sign at this very table. I arranged them beside the power of attorney paperwork under the bright LED lamp I'd used for inspecting buttonholes and examining fabric weave. Side by side. The forgery looked perfect. But perfect isn't the same as real. The magnifying glass came next, the professional one with the built-in light that had cost me $200 15 years ago. I'd used it to spot the difference between genuine silk and synthetic blend, between hand-embroidered details and machine replication. Now I used it to examine the difference between my handwriting and someone else's attempt to become me. When you sign your own name 10,000 times, your hand develops a rhythm. The pen barely lifts between letters. The flow is unconscious, natural, the muscle memory of decades condensed into 3 seconds of motion. You don't think about how to form the C in Constance or the loop of the W in Whitaker. Your hand just knows. This signature had pauses, microscopic hesitations where the forgers stopped to check their work, to compare their progress against some reference image they'd studied. The pressure was too even, too controlled, like someone copying a design instead of creating it. My real signatures showed variation, the natural inconsistency of human movement. This was too careful, too deliberate. Examining a forged signature is like examining a hand-sewn seam trying to pass as machine work. The stitches look identical until you understand the rhythm of the needle. I moved letter by letter, comparing stroke patterns, measuring the angles of ascenders and descenders, checking the way certain letters connected to others. The forger had done their homework. They'd captured my slant, my spacing, even the distinctive way I crossed my T's with a slight upward flourish. Whoever created this had access to dozens, maybe hundreds of my real signatures. They'd studied them, practiced them, perfected the replication. This wasn't just fraud. This was intimacy weaponized. My son had watched me sign his birthday cards, his school permission slips, his college loan papers, storing every detail to use against me. Then I saw it, the place where the forger's nerve had failed them for a fraction of a second. The curve of the lowercase g in Whitaker showed a tremor so faint most people would never notice it, under magnification. The line wavered slightly at the bottom of the descender where it curved back up, a microscopic hesitation that betrayed an unfamiliar hand copying an unfamiliar motion. My signature never hesitates there. I've written that G the same way since I was 16 years old. Since the day I first signed Constance Whitaker after marrying Roland. The motion is automatic, unconscious, as natural as breathing. But this G showed doubt. The forger had paused, recalibrated, corrected their angle mid-stroke. The line thickness varied slightly where the pen pressure changed. It was beautiful work, professional quality. But it wasn't me. I traced the tremor with my fingertip, feeling the slight texture where the ink had pooled during that hesitation. I had proof now, evidence that would stand up in any court. A handwriting expert would spot this in seconds under proper magnification. The forgery was sophisticated, but it was still a forgery. But proof of the crime wasn't enough. I needed to understand why. Why would my son risk federal prison to steal a house he didn't need? The answer, I suspected, would be even more devastating than the crime itself. I picked up the kitchen phone with hands steadier than they'd been in hours, dialed my son's number from memory, and waited to see if the boy I'd raised would tell me the truth or feed me rehearsed lies. He answered on the second ring, no surprise in his voice, no hesitation, just smooth concern that felt practiced. "Mom, are you okay?" "Corbin, it's your mother," I said, keeping my voice small and confused. "Can you explain what happened today?" "A lawyer came with papers saying I have to leave my home." He sighed, a long theatrical exhale that dripped with patronizing sympathy. The exact tone I'd heard him use on hotel guests who'd lost their room keys or locked themselves out of their suites. "Mom, please try to stay calm. I know this is confusing for you. That's exactly why Saskia and I had to make this difficult decision." I gripped the phone tighter, forcing myself to sound vulnerable instead of furious. "What decision? I don't understand what's happening." "Mom, we've talked about this," he said, his patience sounding rehearsed, artificial. "The doctor warned us your memory is declining rapidly. You're having episodes where you don't remember entire days." Dr. Morrison. He mentioned doctor. Morrison specifically. A name I'd never heard in my life. A physician I'd never visited. Appointments I'd never made. "You signed those papers yourself last month," he continued. "You just don't remember doing it." That's exactly what Dr. Morrison said would happen. You'd forget things you did during lucid moments. This was my son, the boy whose first word was mama, who'd crawled into my bed during thunderstorms until he was 8, who'd cried on his first day of kindergarten until I promised to wait outside the classroom. This was that boy, lying to me with the smooth confidence of a practiced con artist. I wanted to scream that I'd never seen any Dr. Morrison, that my mind was sharp as the scissors I'd used for 35 years. But I forced myself to stay quiet and listen, to let him dig his grave deeper with every word. "Remember when you fell on the stairs last month?" His voice carried false concern. "You nearly broke your hip." "And the stove incident, Mom? You could have burned the house down." The stairs. I remembered that day with crystal clarity. The day 3 weeks ago when he'd stopped by unannounced. He'd been cooking soup, he said. Asked me to find a specific wrench in the garage for some repair he claimed to need. I'd spent 10 minutes searching through Roland's old toolbox. When I came back inside, the wooden stairs from the garage felt slippery. I'd caught myself on the railing, confused by the sudden lack of traction. Later, after he left, I'd found furniture polish in the trash can, the expensive kind, that left surfaces dangerously smooth. The fall hadn't been an accident. The near miss on the stairs had been choreographed, timed, executed while I searched the garage for tools he didn't actually need. "You're getting worse, Mom," he continued, voice dripping with false sympathy. "We can't let you hurt yourself. The eviction is for your own protection. We're moving you somewhere safe, somewhere with people who can watch you." He hadn't just forged my signature. He'd spent weeks building a false medical history, staging accidents, creating a paper trail of my supposed incompetence. Every visit, every phone call, every casual stop-by had been reconnaissance, construction, preparation. "I understand," I said quietly, playing the confused elderly woman he needed me to be. "I'm just scared, honey. This is my home." "I know, Mom, but you'll be happier somewhere safer. Trust me." Trust him. The irony burned. I set the receiver back in its cradle, my hand perfectly steady now. My son hadn't just woken up one morning and decided to steal my home. This was planned. Methodical. Built over weeks of carefully staged accidents and fabricated medical crises. The gaslighting had been too smooth, too rehearsed. He'd practiced those lies the way I'd once practiced my wedding vows. Whatever was driving him, it was bigger and darker than simple greed. At 11 that night, when I was sitting in bed reviewing the forged documents one more time, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Who calls at 11 unless it's an emergency or a threat? But something made me answer. Some instinct that said this call mattered. "Hello." The voice was male, older, with the refined accent that came from expensive schools and old money. He didn't say hello, didn't ask if I was speaking to Constance Whitaker. He already knew who'd answer. "You need to be very careful about what's happening around you, Constance," he said, pronouncing my name with 2 distinct syllables instead of running them together the way most people did. "Things are not what they appear." My hand tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" "Someone who wants to make sure you understand what you're facing." His tone was protective, concerned, not threatening. "Untrust your instincts, but question everything." The voice tugged at memory. Something about the cadence, the particular phrasing, the way he spoke with absolute certainty. I knew this voice. I should know this voice, but I couldn't place it, couldn't attach a face or name to the familiar rhythm. "How do you know what's happening to me?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. "I know more than you realize," he said cryptically. "The eviction notice, the forged signatures, the staged accidents. None of this happened by chance. You're dealing with people who've planned very carefully, who was watching me closely enough to know about the eviction notice, the forged documents, the precise shape of my crisis. Why are you calling me? What do you want?" "I don't want anything except for you to be safe," he said, and something in his voice made me believe him. "I'm calling because you need to know that things are about to get worse before they get better. But you're stronger than they think you are. Don't let them convince you otherwise." My mind raced through possibilities. A friend of Roland's? Someone from the tailoring shop? A neighbor who'd noticed too much? "You need to tell me who you are," I said firmly. I can't trust someone who won't identify themselves. You'll understand soon, he promised. For now, just know that you're not as alone as you think. And Constance, he paused, and I heard something that sounded almost like affection in his voice. You're going to come through this. You're more capable than anyone realizes. For the first time since Saskia had walked onto my porch that morning, I felt something other than fury or fear. I felt the faint, tentative possibility that I wasn't fighting this alone. Wait, I said, how do you know about the staged accidents? No one knows about those except... The line went dead before I could finish the question, leaving me staring at the unknown number glowing on my phone screen. I saved the number in my contacts under a single question mark and set the phone on my nightstand. The room felt different now, the darkness less oppressive. Someone out there knew what was happening to me. Someone with a voice I almost recognized was watching from the shadows, tracking the conspiracy against me with enough precision to call at exactly the right moment. The question was whether that shadow held a guardian or another predator. But something in the way he'd said my name, the genuine concern in his voice when he told me to be safe, made me think, made me hope, that for once, someone might actually be on my side. Tomorrow, I would find out just how deep my son's betrayal went. The next morning, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee I couldn't taste, my mind kept circling back to Corbin's reference to the fall, the one he'd staged so carefully I'd almost believed it was my own. Clumsiness. May 18th, 3 weeks ago. He'd arrived unexpectedly that Wednesday afternoon. All concern and filial duty. Said he wanted to check the water heater before summer. Needed a wrench from the garage, would I mind grabbing it? Such a small request. I'd descended those basement stairs 1,000 times in 43 years. Never slipped once. But that day, my foot hit the third step and found no purchase. The wood was slick as ice, sending me tumbling forward. I caught the railing, barely my shoulder, wrenching hard enough to make me gasp. Behind me, Corbin's voice, concerned, rushing down. But in that split second before he spoke, I'd heard something else. A sharp intake of breath. Not shock. Disappointment. Now, coffee growing cold in my hands. I understood. He'd waxed those stairs. Counted on my habit of descending quickly, arms full. Expected a harder fall, maybe a broken hip, nursing home placement, power of attorney while I recovered. The stranger's words echoed. They're planning something worse than eviction. My laptop sat closed on the counter. I'd been avoiding it since yesterday, afraid to confirm what I already suspected. But I flipped it open now, fingers steady as I logged into my savings account, the one Corbin knew about. The one I'd mentioned casually over the years. My security blanket from decades of careful budgeting. The page loaded. Account balance $0. Last transaction June 7th. Withdrawal $85,000. Authorization code confirmed. I stared at the screen, a strange calm settling over me. He'd taken it all. Probably forged my signature again. Or somehow accessed my accounts through that power of attorney paperwork I'd refused to sign. He'd found another way. $85,000 for most 60-year-old widows. That would be devastating, life-destroying. Exactly what Corbin was counting on. The final push into dependence, into whatever facility he'd chosen, into the victim role he needed me to play. But here's what my son didn't know. What nobody knew except my lawyer and accountant, that $85,000 was pocket change. In 1987, I'd started sewing custom pieces for a young designer named Marion Chen, working from my dining room table. When her boutique line took off, she'd offered me something unusual. Payment in equity instead of cash. 1% of her company for 5 years of exclusive work. Back then, David thought I was crazy. 1% of nothing is nothing, he'd said. But I'd seen Marion's vision, her relentless drive. Chen Atelier went public in 2019. My 1% stake, carefully rolled over through 3 acquisitions and 2 mergers, was currently valued at $145 million. I looked at the zeroed account again. Corbin had stolen my survival money, thinking he'd cornered me. Instead, he'd shown me exactly how far he was willing to go. And he'd done it while completely ignorant of the real fortune he was supposedly after. The life insurance policy $12 million was substantial, worth killing for, apparently. But it was nothing compared to what I actually possessed. The irony was almost funny. He was planning my murder for a fraction of what he'd inherit legitimately if he just waited. Unless, of course, he wasn't planning to wait at all. I closed the laptop and picked up my phone. The stranger had said to be careful, to trust no one. But I needed answers now. Because if Corbin didn't know about the $145 million, what was his endgame? Why the urgency? Why the escalation from staged accidents to emptied accounts to whatever came next? My thumb hovered over the recent calls list. One unknown number. One warning. He had no idea I was about to fight back with weapons he couldn't imagine. The coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago, but I couldn't stop scrolling through the transaction history on my laptop screen, searching for the invisible hand that had reached into my life and emptied it. Fighting back required evidence, not suspicion, not maternal heartbreak, hard proof that would hold up under scrutiny. I'd already screenshot the zeroed balance. Now I needed to understand exactly how $85,000 had vanished from an account only I was supposed to access. I pulled up 3 months of activity. At first glance, the theft looked simple. One transaction. June 7th, $85,000 withdrawn. But when I expanded the detail view, a different pattern emerged. 12 separate transfers, all electronic. All to an external account ending in 7743. The first transfer April 23rd, $7,000. Then April 27th, $6,000. May 2nd, $8,000. Every few days, another chunk disappeared. Amounts varied: $5,200, $9,800, $7,450, but none exceeded $10,000. I sat back, pulse quickening. The $10,000 threshold wasn't arbitrary. It was federal law. Banks reported cash transactions above that amount to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Whoever structured these transfers knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't opportunistic theft. It was systematic financial crime. I clicked into account settings, hands steadier than they should have been, security preferences, notification settings. And there it was, fraud alert notifications disabled. Date modified, March 15th, 2026. 3 weeks before the first unauthorized transfer. Whoever planned this had eliminated the alarm system before breaking in. The sound of rain against the window pulled me back to the present. How long had I been sitting here? My neck ached. My vision blurred from staring at the screen, but the adrenaline of discovery kept my fingers moving across the keyboard. I opened the security log. Every settings change left a digital fingerprint timestamp. IP address, authentication method. The March 15th entry showed the fraud alerts had been disabled at 2:47 p.m. Authenticated using my master password and verified through my backup email address, both of which were stored in exactly one place outside my own memory, a locked drawer in my bedroom desk. In a notebook Corbin had helped me create when Harold died, and I'd needed to consolidate our accounts. My hands hovered over the keyboard. There had to be another explanation. A security breach, a phishing scam, something. I clicked through to my email account, searching for any messages about security changes. Nothing in my inbox. Nothing in sent mail. But when I opened my drafts folder, I found something I'd never written. Subject line: Update backup email address. Date created April 2nd, 2026. The message was addressed to my bank's customer service, requesting my backup email be changed from the Gmail address I'd used for 15 years to a new address, c.whitaker, secure@protonmail.com, an account I'd never created, never heard of. The draft had never been sent. Someone had composed it, saved it, then apparently decided on a different approach. But why save it at all? Unless they'd been rehearsing, testing the language, making sure the request would pass the bank's verification process before committing to the actual fraud. I screenshot the draft. my mind moving through implications like needle through fabric, the same methodical precision I'd used for 40 years of seamstress. Work now turned toward unraveling my son's crime. Because it was Corbin! Of course it was Corbin! I thought about the afternoon Corbin helped me set up this account after Harold died. How patient he'd been, explaining two-factor authentication and backup security protocols. How he'd written down my passwords in his neat engineer's handwriting and promised to keep them safe. Safe. The word tasted bitter now. I pulled up the March 15th security log one more time, reading the authentication details with the careful attention I'd once reserved for checking Chanel hymns. Master password verified. Backup email verified. Security question answered correctly. What street did you grow up on? Maple Street. The answer was in that same locked notebook. Only one person knew that password. Corbin, my son. The boy I'd rocked through colic and night terrors, whose passwords I'd trusted him to safeguard, who'd used that trust to systematically drain an account he thought was my only safety net. But he'd made one critical miscalculation. I pulled the burner phone from the false bottom of my jewelry box, the one Corbin had never seen, and dialed the number I'd memorized. 15 years ago. The phone itself was unremarkable, a basic prepaid model I replaced every 6 months. Registered under a name that wasn't mine. Connected to a secure line that existed for exactly one purpose. When Marion Chen's company went public in 2019, and my equity stake suddenly became worth more than Corbin would earn in 3 lifetimes, I'd needed someone who understood discretion as well as wealth management. Vivica Kendrick, the 52-year-old wealth manager who had quietly grown my fashion equity stake into a fortress Corbin would never breach, answered on the first ring. "It's me," I said. No names. We'd established that protocol years ago. Secure line. Her voice carried the clip precision of someone who'd worked in private banking long enough to know when clients called outside business hours. It wasn't about portfolio rebalancing. "Yes, I need your help." I heard the subtle shift in her breathing, the transition from casual to operational. "Go ahead." I walked her through it methodically. The eviction notice, the forged signature, the stolen $85,000. The disabled fraud alerts, the security logs that pointed to Corbin. I sent her the screenshots as we spoke, watching the images upload to our encrypted server. "He structured the withdrawals below the reporting threshold," Vivica said after a pause. "That's not amateur hour." "No, it's not." "And you're certain he doesn't know about the primary assets?" "The primary assets. Our careful euphemism for $145 million in fashion equity. Real estate holdings, and diversified investments that existed in a world Corbin had never glimpsed. I'm certain he thinks that savings account was everything I had." My hand trembled as I held the phone, not from fear, but from the strange relief of finally having a weapon he didn't know I carried. Vivica's voice came through crisp and calm. "How deep do you want me to look?" "Everything. Bank records, credit reports, shell companies, offshore accounts. I need to know what they're hiding." "They." "Corbin and his wife Saskia. If he's stealing from me, she knows. They don't sneeze without consulting each other." 24 hours, Vivica said. "I'll send the report to your secure email." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of what I was authorizing. A full forensic investigation into my own son's financial life. The kind of deep background search that would uncover every debt, every transaction, every secret he thought he'd buried. "Look for desperation," I added. "Debts, judgments, anything that shows financial pressure." "You think they're in trouble?" Vivica asked. "I think they needed that $85,000 for something worse than greed." Silence on the line. "Then, people in financial trouble make mistakes, get sloppy. If there's a trail, I'll find it." "What kind of markers should I expect?" "Desperation markers," Vivica said. "Recent credit applications, loan defaults, legal judgments, second mortgages. The kind of paper trail people leave when they're drowning and grabbing at anything that floats." I thought about Corbin's careful planning, the disabled alerts 3 weeks in advance, the practiced email draft, the structured transfers. That level of premeditation suggested something more calculated than panic. But panic could still be the root cause. Fear made people plan. What kind of debt makes a man steal from his own mother? There's one more thing, I said. The anonymous caller who warned me, he said they were planning something worse than eviction. I need to know what that means. Life insurance. The word hung between us, heavy and cold. $12 million policy, I confirmed. Corbin is the beneficiary. Then we're not looking for debt, Vivica said quietly. We're looking for motive. She promised results by tomorrow morning. Until then, I had screenshots of password logs, a missing $85,000, and one certainty. People don't commit careful fraud unless they're running from something worse. I want to know what they're running from. Vivica would find the answers. But while I waited for tomorrow's report, I had a different kind of work to do. The sound of packing tape ripping off the roll echoed through the empty living room like applause for a performance only I knew I was giving. I'd stopped at Turner Hardware on the way home, purchasing 6 large moving boxes, packing tape, and a permanent marker. The young clerk had offered sympathy when he saw my selections. Moving is always hard, he'd said. I'd smiled the tired smile of a woman facing displacement and thanked him. Now those boxes lay scattered across my living room floor, deliberately positioned near the large bay windows facing the street. Anyone driving past would see them. That was the point. I assembled the first box slowly, folding cardboard along its creases, tucking bottom flaps into place. The tape screamed as I pulled it across the seam, loud, definitive, the sound of surrender. I positioned the completed box directly in front of the window, angled so the empty interior would be visible from outside. Then I filled it with things that didn't matter. Old magazines from 2019, a chipped serving platter I'd always hated, a broken picture frame, items that suggested genuine packing without sacrificing anything of value. Theater required props, and props required authenticity. I assembled 3 more boxes, each placed strategically near windows, each partially filled with obvious trash dressed up as belongings. I left the curtains wide open, staging the scene of a woman preparing to abandon her home. The movements came slowly, deliberately, the exhausted motions of someone who'd accepted defeat. My father used to say, the best hunters are the ones who know how to look wounded. He'd been talking about fishing, demonstrating how to let the line go slack when a steelhead pulled hard, making the fish think it had won before setting the hook. But the principle applied just as well to sons who thought their mothers were easy prey. I wrote kitchen on one box in shaky handwriting, making my penmanship look older than it was. Added fragile to another with letters that slanted uncertainly. Every detail mattered. Corbin was an engineer. He noticed patterns, inconsistencies, things that didn't align with expectations. So I gave him exactly what he expected, a defeated 60-year-old widow packing up her life because she didn't have the strength or resources to fight a forged eviction notice. I was sealing the 5th box when I saw the silver sedan. Corbin's car, the Audi with the personalized plate that read ENGR-38. It appeared at the far end of the street, moving slowly, too slowly for someone simply driving through. I didn't look up. Didn't acknowledge it, just kept pulling tape across the box seam, my movements tired and mechanical. From the corner of my eye, I watched the sedan slow further as it approached my house. It paused. Not a complete stop, but that subtle deceleration of someone trying not to be obvious while gathering information. I could feel his gaze cataloging the scattered boxes, the open curtains, the visible evidence of my compliance. I reached for the permanent marker and wrote living room on the box, my hand trembling just slightly. Not from nerves, from the effort of controlling my performance. The sedan continued down the street, its pace returning to normal once it passed my driveway. He'd seen what he came to see. Verification that the pressure was working. Confirmation that I was preparing to surrender without a fight. Let him think he's won. The best traps are the ones that feel like victory. I watched his taillights disappear around the corner and pressed another strip of tape across an empty box. Tomorrow, Vivica's report would tell me what they were hiding. Today, I'd let them believe I had nothing left to hide myself. The last strip of tape sealed my role as the broken victim they needed me to be. The performance didn't end when Corbin drove away. It expanded. The digital recorder in my coat pocket felt heavier than its 3 ounces as I knocked on the penthouse door, balancing the wedding album in my other hand like a peace offering. I'd purchased the device that afternoon at an electronics store 2 towns over, paying cash, giving a false name. The sales clerk had demonstrated its voice activation feature, the 48-hour battery life, the remarkable sensitivity that could pick up whispered conversations from 15 feet away. Popular with private investigators, he'd said. I'd smiled and told him I was writing a detective novel. The album was real Saskia and Corbin's wedding photos from 2 years ago. I'd pulled it from my bookshelf before leaving, a perfect prop for the role I was about to play. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened. Saskia stood in the doorway, her 36-year-old face arranged in an expression of surprise that didn't quite reach her calculating blue eyes. She wore cream silk loungewear that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Constance," she said, "I wasn't expecting. I found this while packing and thought you and Corbin might want it, your wedding photos." I held out the album, my hands trembling just slightly. The broken mother, generous even in defeat. Saskia's gaze flicked to the album, then back to my face. "You're packing already." Her voice carried false sympathy, the practiced concern of someone who'd won and was trying not to gloat. "What choice do I have?" I let my shoulders sag. 96 hours isn't much time. She hesitated, then stepped back. "Come in for a moment." The penthouse was everything my waterfront house wasn't. Modern, minimalist, aggressively expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Charleston's harbor. The furniture was Italian leather. The art was original, and the marble countertops gleamed under designer lighting. A boutique hotel operations director's salary didn't pay for this. Neither did a software engineer's income, even a senior one. I settled onto the white leather sofa, the recorder concealed in my left palm. My right hand held the album, which I opened to a photo of Saskia in her wedding dress, all calculated elegance and photogenic grace. "You looked beautiful that day," I said softly. "Thank you." Saskia sat across from me, maintaining distance. "This place is beautiful. Must be expensive." "We manage," she said, not meeting my eyes. My late husband Harold used to say I had a seamstress's hands, steady, precise, designed for delicate work under pressure. Those hands didn't shake as I turned another page of the album, as I made small talk about the flower arrangements and the venue, as I waited for the opening I needed. It came 5 minutes later. Saskia's phone rang, the tone sharp and urgent. She glanced at the screen, and something shifted in her expression. Tension, maybe concern. "I need to take this. It's work," she said, standing quickly. "Of course. Take your time." She moved toward the balcony, phone already at her ear, her voice dropping to a murmur I couldn't quite hear. Her back turned to me. My hand moved. The recorder slipped from my palm into the gap between the sofa cushion and the frame, settling into the shadowed space where no one would look unless they were searching specifically for it. The movement took less than 2 seconds. Seamstress hands, precise, invisible. I pulled my hand back and turned another page of the wedding album, my pulse hammering in my ears, but my expression serene. How much can you hear through a recording device that costs $400 and weighs less than a lipstick? Everything the sales clerk had promised. Every word spoken in normal tones within 15 feet. Saskia's voice drifted from the balcony, too quiet to parse, but the recorder would catch it. Would catch every conversation she and Corbin had in this living room. Every phone call, every whispered strategy session. I heard her footsteps returning. My hand left the sofa edge just as Saskia turned around, her phone call finished. "Everything all right?" I asked, my voice steady, my heart hammering. She had no idea I'd just turned her sanctuary into my listening post. Saskia's eyes tracked downward to where my hand had been resting against the sofa edge, and I watched her expression shift from polite distance to cold calculation. Time slowed. My pulse hammered in my throat. The recording device sat 3 inches beneath the cushion, voice activated and waiting. If she looked, if she reached down. "What were you doing just now?" Saskia's voice carried an edge I'd never heard before, sharp as surgical steel. I kept my face innocent. Confused. Doing. Your hand. She took a step closer, her gaze fixed on the sofa's edge where my fingers had disappeared for those critical 2 seconds. It was down by the cushions. My mind raced. The handkerchief, the one I'd placed in my coat pocket specifically for this scenario. The backup plan I'd hoped I wouldn't need became my only lifeline. But I couldn't reach for it immediately. Too obvious, too convenient. Saskia was smart enough to see through a prepared defense. So I gave her confusion first. I stopped. Manufactured realization crossing my face. Let her see me piece together what she was asking. Let her watch me understand the accusation. Your hand was down by the cushions. Why? Her tone had shifted from suspicious to accusatory. She moved another step closer, those calculating blue eyes scanning the leather surface where I'd been sitting. If she bent down, if she looked, if she slid her hand into that gap. I'm sorry, I said, voice small and embarrassed. I wasn't trying to, it's just that I dropped something and I didn't want to interrupt your call by making a fuss. Dropped what? This was the moment, caught or safe, discovered or free. And all I could think was that 40 years of reading people's faces across fitting room mirrors had trained me for exactly this performance. I reached into my coat pocket with careful arthritic slowness, let my fingers fumble slightly. Let her see an old woman struggling with a simple task. The handkerchief emerged, white linen with my initials embroidered in the corner. Harold had given me a set of them on our 20th anniversary. I carried one always. A widow's habit. I dropped my handkerchief. I was just picking it up when you turned around. See? I held it up, the fabric catching the penthouse's expensive lighting. Physical evidence of innocence. Proof of a mundane explanation. Saskia stared at it, then at me, her expression unreadable, calculating, weighing truth against suspicion. She crossed the remaining distance between us and took the handkerchief from my hand, examining it like a detective studying evidence at a crime scene. Her fingers traced the embroidered initials, the fine linen weave. Looking for what? A reason to disbelieve. You should be more careful, she said finally. The words hung between us, layered with meaning I couldn't quite parse. Was it a warning? A threat? Or simply the condescending advice of someone who thought she held all the power? You're right, I said softly. I'm sorry for the confusion. I should go. You've been kind enough letting me interrupt your evening. I stood, smoothing my coat, every movement telegraphing defeat and embarrassment. The broken mother. Chastened. Apologetic. Eager to escape. Saskia set the handkerchief on the side table, her gaze lingering on it for one more moment before she finally turned away. How many heartbeats can fit into 3 seconds of silence? Enough to calculate survival. Enough to measure how close I'd come to disaster. My heartbeat deafened me, hammering so loud I was certain she could hear it. The recording device was 3 inches from where she'd been standing, and she had no idea how close she'd come to finding it. But I knew. And as I followed Saskia toward the penthouse door, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. This wasn't a game I could afford to play carelessly. One wrong move, one suspicious gesture, one moment of broken character, and they would know I was hunting them. The question was whether I could maintain the performance long enough to spring the trap. She'd turned away. The device was safe. But I wasn't finished. Saskia disappeared into the kitchen to make tea I hadn't asked for, and I moved toward Corbin's home office with the second recording device already warm in my palm. I'd purchased 2 units that afternoon. The electronics store clerk had offered a discount for buying multiple pieces from the same surveillance line. They synced together, he'd explained, demonstrating how both devices could feed into a single receiver. I'd thanked him and paid cash for the pair. One device in the living room sofa could capture general conversations. But Corbin's home office, where he made private calls, discussed confidential matters, planned in solitude. That was where the real evidence would live. From the kitchen came the sound of running water, cabinets opening, the ceramic clink of mugs being arranged. Saskia was occupied. I had perhaps 90 seconds before she returned. I crossed the hallway on silent feet, my hand already reaching for the office door. It stood slightly ajar, open maybe 15 degrees. I memorized the angle critical for avoiding detection, then pushed it wider and slipped inside. The office was dark, except for ambient light from the harbor-facing window. My eyes adjusted quickly, taking inventory. Expensive mahogany desk, Herman Miller chair, built-in bookshelves lined with engineering texts and business manuals. Everything precise, organized, controlled. Very Corbin. I needed a hiding spot that offered clear audio access to the desk area while remaining invisible to casual observation. My gaze swept the room methodically, the same way I used to scan fabric bolts for flaws. There, on the credenza behind his desk chair, a silver-framed photograph. I crossed to it, careful not to disturb the precisely aligned items on the desk surface. The photo showed the three of us from 2 years ago Thanksgiving dinner, before Saskia's calculating eyes had hardened, before Corbin's visits had become surveillance missions instead of son's duty. The family photo stared back at me, my smile genuine in that image, Corbin's arm around my shoulders, both of us believing in futures that would never arrive. I lifted the frame carefully. The back panel had a narrow gap between the photograph backing and the metal stand. Perfect. The second recording device emerged from my coat pocket, smaller than the first, designed specifically for vertical placement. I peeled the adhesive strip from its backing and pressed it firmly behind the frame, angling it slightly toward the desk where Corbin would sit for phone calls and private conversations. The frame went back into position, and its angle exactly as I'd found it. The device was invisible unless someone specifically looked behind the photograph. And why would they? It was just family memorabilia. A token of connection that had become a monument to betrayal. From the kitchen, the kettle began to whistle. I moved. 3 steps to the door, hand on the frame, pulling it back to that original 15-degree angle. 4 steps across the hallway, back to the living room sofa, settling into the exact position I'd occupied before, the wedding album still open on my lap. My breathing was steady. My hands didn't shake. 40 years of maintaining composure while clients complained about hem lengths and seam placements had trained me well. Saskia appeared in the doorway carrying a lacquered tray with 2 porcelain cups. Steam rising from expensive tea I recognized from boutique shops downtown. "I thought you might need something warm," she said, setting the tray on the coffee table. "That's very kind." 2 bugs in 2 rooms, I'd turned their fortress into my confessional booth. I closed the wedding album and accepted the teacup she offered, our fingers not quite touching. The recording device behind Corbin's family photo was 5 feet from his desk chair, positioned to capture every word he spoke in what he believed was privacy. They thought they were watching me surrender, but I'd just turned their home into my surveillance station. I'd left the penthouse with both devices operational, returned home with surveillance victory warm in my chest, and tried to sleep. The phone vibrated against my nightstand at 2:04 a.m. Unknown number. Same pattern as before, and I knew before answering that sleep was finished for the night. I pressed accept, my voice rough with interrupted rest. "Hello? Constance, are you safe right now?" The electronically disguised voice on the other end belonged to someone who called himself Nothing, but whose cadence and speech patterns felt like a memory I couldn't quite place. Male, certainly. The distortion couldn't hide the fundamental pitch and rhythm, but the electronic modulation turned every word into a metallic echo that stripped away identifying features. "Who is this? How did you get this number again?" "That's not important. What matters is that you're being watched." I sat up, fully awake now, my heart accelerating. Watched by who? By them, by me, by people you don't even know exist yet. The words should have terrified me. Instead, they sharpened my focus. This was the second call from this number. The first had warned me about something worse than eviction. Now it was warning me about surveillance. "Why are you calling me at 2 in the morning?" "Because they sleep now. Because this is the only time I can be certain they're not listening." My fingers tightened on the phone. Who are they? Your son, his wife, the people they're working with. People they're working with. The phrase landed like a physical blow. I'd assumed this was just Corbin and Saskia, a desperate couple stealing from family. But accomplices suggested organization, conspiracy, something larger than opportunistic fraud. Don't trust anyone but yourself, the voice continued, not even the people helping you. My breath caught. How do you know about? Fear tightened my throat, cutting off the sentence. How many people knew I'd hired help? Only Vivica. And Vivica was locked behind encryption, anonymous payment structures, professional discretion. I know you went to the penthouse, the voice said quietly. I know what you're planning. And I know they're more dangerous than you realize. The bedroom suddenly felt smaller, the darkness more oppressive. How many people know where I went tonight? I'd been so careful. Purchased the recording devices in a different town, paid cash, used the wedding album cover story, performed the broken mother role perfectly. But someone had been watching, tracking my movements, following my investigation. Who are you? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Why are you watching me? Because someone has to. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give you right now. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the faint electronic hum of the modulated connection. I tried to parse the rhythm beneath the distortion, searching for recognition. The cadence was familiar, the way certain syllables landed, the pause before answering. Someone I'd spoken to before. But who? We have history together, the voice said, as if reading my thoughts. You'll understand when the time is right. I need to understand now. They're planning something for next week. You need to move faster. Next week, 7 days. The 96-hour eviction deadline was June 13th, 4 days away. But next week stretched beyond that, into territory I hadn't mapped yet. What are they planning? Something permanent, something you can't come back from. The $12 million life insurance policy flashed through my mind. Permanent meant final, irreversible, fatal. Wait, I started, but the line was already dead. The silence after the call ended felt louder than the voice had been, filled with questions I couldn't answer and warnings I couldn't ignore. I sat in the darkness, staring at the unknown number on my screen. Someone was watching me closely enough to know my movements, my plans, my investigation. The voice had been disguised, but the familiarity underneath haunted me. Who is watching me, and why? I couldn't answer that question alone in the dark, so I'd driven to a riverside cafe at dawn, ordered coffee I didn't drink, and waited for something, anything, to make sense. I was stirring cold coffee at a riverside cafe table, exhausted from the 2 a.m. call and waiting for Vivica's report, when a young woman I didn't recognize walked straight toward me with purpose in her stride. She was mid-20s, professionally dressed in a charcoal blazer and white blouse. Her dark hair pulled into a tight bun that suggested corporate discipline, but her eyes carried something harder than ambition. Anger, barely controlled, mixed with fear. Mrs. Whitaker? She asked, stopping at my table. I set down my spoon, wary. Yes? I'm Ilara Redmond. I worked for your daughter-in-law until 3 weeks ago. Ilara Redmond, 26 years old, was Saskia's former executive assistant who'd been fired 3 weeks ago on false theft charges after witnessing emails she was never meant to see. She sat without invitation, her movements quick and nervous, like someone who'd rehearsed this approach but was still uncertain about executing it. Worked for Saskia? I kept my voice neutral, confused. I don't understand. She fired me. Wrongful termination to cover up something she didn't want witnesses to. Ilara's words came fast, clipped. Accused me of stealing petty cash, escorted me out by security, threatened legal action if I contested it, destroyed my references, my reputation, everything I'd built in 2 years of loyal service. I studied her face, searching for deception, found only bitter honesty. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know what kind of people are trying to destroy you. She leaned forward, voice dropping. I saw emails I wasn't supposed to see between Saskia and your son. My pulse quickened. What kind of emails? The kind that talk about life insurance payouts and solving problems permanently. Life insurance payouts. The words hung between us like a confession she didn't need to elaborate on. The cafe sounds faded the espresso machine's hiss. the murmur of morning conversations, the clink of silverware against ceramic. All I could hear was my own heartbeat and the terrible confirmation of what I'd already suspected. When did you see these emails? May 18th. I was managing Saskia's calendar, organizing her inbox. She usually deleted sensitive messages immediately. But that morning, she left her computer unlocked when she went to a meeting. I saw an email thread between her and someone identified only as C, your son, I'm assuming. May 18th. The same day Corbin had waxed my stairs. Staged the fall that should have broken my hip and sent me to a nursing home. What did the emails say exactly? Financial pressure, debts mounting, timeline accelerating. And then she paused, her jaw tightening. A discussion about $12 million being the solution to everything if they could just execute the plan before the deadline. $12 million. The life insurance policy. Saskia came back early, saw me at her computer. I tried to pretend I was just filing emails, but she knew. I could see it in her face. 3 hours later, security was walking me out for alleged theft I never committed. Ilara reached into her purse and produced a small USB drive, black and unremarkable except for what it represented. Evidence. Leverage. Proof. I made copies before security walked me out. Everything's on here. Emails, calendar entries, phone logs from her work cell that synced to her desktop. She set the drive on the table between us. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked quietly. Because Saskia tried to ruin my life to protect her secrets. Now, I'm returning the favor. Revenge makes strange bedfellows. And Ilara's anger was about to become my advantage. The USB drive slid across the cafe table, stopping against my coffee cup. "Everything you need to prove they're planning something is on there," Ilara said, standing to leave. "This will remove all doubt." I closed my fingers around the drive, feeling its weight like a verdict. I drove home gripping the USB drive so tightly it left an impression in my palm. The USB drive clicked into my laptop port with the finality of loading a bullet into a chamber. And I double-clicked the first folder, Saskia_correspondence_2024 to 2026, with hands that had stopped shaking hours ago. The directory structure appeared methodical, organized by date and recipient. Ilara had been thorough. Emails sorted chronologically, calendar entries cross-referenced with phone logs, forwarded messages flagged with colored labels indicating priority. This wasn't a panicked backup. This was evidence collection by someone who understood documentation. The most recent folder was dated May 2026. The oldest stretched back to October 2024. I opened the May folder first, scanning subject lines, timeline confirmation, final arrangements, payment schedule verification. Clinical language designed to sound legitimate while discussing something that made my skin crawl. I clicked on Timeline Confirmation, dated May 15, 2026. The email chain appeared between Saskia and someone identified as Dr. Marcus Howell. Sender address from Coastal Health Assessments, LLC. The company name meant nothing to me, but the content made my stomach turn. Dr. Howell confirmed receipt of payment for expedited health evaluation services and agreed to backdate documentation to match. Insurance application requirements. He referenced standard protocols for age-appropriate cognitive assessments that would support a finding of early-stage decline, without triggering immediate red flags. I read it twice, parsing the careful euphemisms. They were falsifying medical records, creating a paper trail that would make my death look like the tragic but unsurprising end of a woman whose health had been quietly deteriorating. The next email was worse. Saskia asking about timing, how long between documented cognitive decline and accidental death before insurance investigators questioned the coincidence. Dr. Howell's response, minimum 6 weeks, optimal window 3 to 4 months, creates narrative consistency. Narrative consistency. They were workshopping my murder like a screenplay. I had to stop reading. Stand up, walk to the window, and remind myself to breathe. The clinical precision of their planning felt like reading my own autopsy report, written in advance. The harbor stretched beyond my window, peaceful and oblivious. Sailboats drifted in afternoon sun. Normal life continuing while I discovered the architecture of my own planned death. I returned to the laptop and opened another email dated April 23, 2026. Saskia to Dr. Howell, need confirmation that all documentation will pass standard insurance fraud investigation protocols. Client is paying premium rates for guaranteed results. Client. She was referring to herself, or possibly Corbin, as a client purchasing murder infrastructure. Doctor. Howell's reply assured her that Coastal Health Assessments had processed similar arrangements 17 times in the past 3 years, without incident. 17. This wasn't an isolated conspiracy. This was a business model. I scrolled through more emails, each one building a comprehensive picture of insurance fraud, coordinated through what appeared to be a network of corrupt medical professionals. Backdated health assessments. Falsified cognitive evaluations. Coordinated documentation designed to establish pre-existing conditions that would make accidental death seem inevitable rather than suspicious. Then I reached the bottom of the directory and opened the oldest folder. October 2024. One email. Subject line, Initial Consultation Inquiry. From Saskia.Morrison@tidewater-hospitality.com to m.howell@coastalhealthassess.com. Date, October 18, 2024, 9:47 a.m. Saskia Morrison, her maiden name, before she became Saskia Whitaker. The message was brief, professional. Careful. I'm researching procedures for obtaining comprehensive life insurance policies on older family members with significant assets. What services does your facility provide for health documentation and risk assessment? October 18, 2024. Corbin proposed to Saskia in December 2024. I remember the date exactly, December 20th, because he'd brought her to Christmas dinner 3 days later. Her engagement ring catching candlelight. Her smile warm and genuine, and utterly false. How long does it take to plan a murder disguised as natural causes? 2 months before Corbin brought Saskia home to meet me for the first time. The email asked about life insurance policies on older family members with significant assets. This wasn't a crime of opportunity or desperation. This was a predator choosing her prey, and I'd welcomed her into my home with open arms. And now, I was going to prove every calculation she'd made was built on a foundation I could demolish. The forged eviction notice with my supposedly notarized signature sat on my desk like an accusation. And suddenly, I remembered the one place they couldn't fake my presence. My old order logbook from the tailoring shop. I crossed the hallway to what had been my sewing room before retirement, now converted to storage space filled with fabric remnants and archived business records. The room still smelled faintly of sizing spray and cotton thread, triggering muscle memory of 40 years spent measuring seams and pinning hems. The logbook sat on the shelf between bankers' boxes of old invoices. Worn brown leather, edges softened by handling, pages yellowed but intact. I'd kept meticulous records from 2018 through 2025, documenting every custom order date received, client name, garment specifications, delivery location, final payment. Habits formed over decades don't disappear just because you close a business. I carried the logbook back to my desk and opened it carefully, pages crackling under my fingers. The entries marched chronologically through years of work, wedding dresses, tailored suits, alterations for clients who trusted no one else with their special occasions. March 2026. I flipped to the tab, scanning my own handwriting for the 22nd. There. March 22nd, 2026. Client, Rebecca Hartwell, garment custom wedding dress, ivory silk charmeuse, cathedral train, hand-beaded bodice. Delivery 847 Lighthouse Road, Nags Head, North Carolina. Mileage 247 miles. Final fitting on site, 1:30 to 3:15 p.m. Adjusted bustle attachment. Hem train, additional 2 inches per bride's request. Payment received. I'd sketched the bustle modification in the margin, my standard practice for documenting last-minute alterations. My handwriting in that logbook was as familiar as my own face, 40 years of careful notation. Every dress and suit recorded with the same precision I'd used to measure inseams and mark hemlines. Nags Head, North Carolina, Outer Banks, 247 miles from Charleston. The forged eviction notice claimed I'd appeared before a notary in Charleston on March 22, 2026 at 2:15 p.m., signing documents that granted Corbin power of attorney over my property. But I'd been in North Carolina, fitting a wedding dress, adjusting a bustle, 247 miles away from any notary's office in Charleston. I opened my phone and navigated to location history, a feature I'd enabled years ago for tracking mileage deductions. March 22nd, loaded slowly, then displayed my route, Charleston to Nags Head via Highway 17. Arrival time, 12:47 p.m. Return trip departed at 4:23 p.m. The entire afternoon documented in GPS, coordinates, and timestamps. But I needed more than digital breadcrumbs. I needed something tangible that would survive scrutiny in court. I pulled up my email and searched for Rebecca Hartwell's name. Found the payment confirmation sent from my Square account on March 22, 2026 at 2:47 p.m. The receipt included geolocation data, Nags Head, North Carolina, 27959. I'd received payment for a wedding dress fitting in North Carolina at 2:47 p.m. The forged document claimed I'd signed legal paperwork in South Carolina at 2:15 p.m. Physically impossible, provably false, demonstrably fraudulent. 3 independent sources of evidence, handwritten business logbook with detailed notes and sketches, GPS, location history showing my route and arrival times, digital payment receipt with geolocation timestamp. No lawyer could dismiss this as faulty memory or confused dates. This was documentation the kind that survived cross-examination, the kind that turned suspicion into conviction. They'd tried to forge my signature, but they couldn't forge my life, and the life I'd lived was documented in leather and ink they never knew existed. I photographed every page the logbook entry with its margin sketch, the GPS route map, the payment receipt with its timestamp and location, uploaded them to the secure cloud storage Vivica had set up for me. 3 copies, 3 locations, ironclad backup. March 22, 2026, Nags Head, North Carolina. Wedding dress delivery, 247 miles from Charleston. The notary document claimed I signed away control of my finances that same afternoon in South Carolina. Not just doubt anymore this was iron proof of forgery. And forgery meant fraud. And fraud meant criminal conspiracy. Criminal conspiracy required conspirators, and I needed to hear exactly how guilty my son was. The headphones settled over my ears with the weight of judgment as I clicked play on the first audio file from the penthouse bug, bracing myself to hear my son's voice planning my death. Static crackled first, then ambient sound, the hum of expensive air conditioning, the distant whisper of harbor wind against penthouse windows. The recording device's timestamp showed June 9th, 11:47 p.m., hours after I'd left with my fake wedding album and real surveillance equipment. Then voices, Corbin and Saskia. The documents won't hold up. What if she checks? What if someone verifies the notary? Corbin's voice was high, strained, nothing like the confident senior operations director I thought I knew. This was panic, barely controlled, fear bleeding through every syllable. Calm down. Nobody's going to check. She's packing. It's working. Saskia's voice carried the opposite quality, flat, controlled. The tone of someone managing a crisis they'd anticipated. You didn't see her face. Corbin continued. His words came fast, tumbling over each other. When I drove by and saw those boxes, she looked defeated. Yeah, but what if that's just an act? What if she's setting us up? Setting us up. She's 60 years old. You stole her savings. She thinks her only option is to leave. I can't do this anymore. Corbin's voice cracked. What if she goes to the police? What if they trace it back to us? The signature on the eviction notice is forged. Any forensic examiner could... Stop. Silence. Then Saskia again. Quieter, but harder. You don't have a choice, baby. Neither of us do. Not with what we owe them. Them. The word hung in the recording like a threat. That was my son's voice, the same voice that used to call me from college homesick, that asked me to teach him how to tie a Windsor knot for his first job interview. Now, shaking with fear over documents meant to destroy me. I pressed the headphones tighter against my ears, forcing myself to listen. "We should have never gotten involved with," Corbin started. "But we did." Saskia cut him off. "And now we owe them $380,000 by mid-July, and they've made it very clear what happens if we don't pay." 380,000. The number landed like a physical blow. The syndicate wants their money by mid-July. You know what happens if we don't deliver. The syndicate. Not loan sharks, not credit card debt. A syndicate organized crime with collection methods that didn't involve lawyers and payment plans. "I know," Corbin whispered. The recording barely caught it. "I know. We have to finish this." "The policy pays out $12 million, Saskia said, her voice taking on the persuasive quality I recognized from our earlier conversations. "We pay them what we owe. We disappear somewhere they can't find us. Start over. And my mother. Your mother is 60 years old. How many good years does she have left anyway?" The casual cruelty of it made my breath catch. "Don't," Corbin said, but his voice was hollow. He already surrendered. "I'm being practical. You wanted solutions? This is the solution. The only one that keeps us both alive." Silence stretched. I could hear Corbin's breathing through the sensitive microphone, ragged, uneven. "July 14th, Saskia continued. "That's the deadline. The syndicate gave us until then. So we have 4 weeks to execute the plan. Collect the payout and pay them off." 4 weeks, Corbin repeated, "to kill my mother, to save our lives." More silence. Then footsteps, a door closing. The recording continued with ambient sound, the air conditioning, the distant traffic, but no more voices. When did my boy become someone else's puppet? I pulled the headphones off, hands trembling. Corbin wasn't the villain I'd prepared to destroy. He was a victim too, controlled by Saskia and terrified of someone worse. Each memory of his childhood shattered against the recording of his voice shaking with fear. How do you save someone who's trying to kill you? I didn't know the answer yet, but I needed to hear the rest. I forced the headphones back on despite every instinct screaming to stop. And that's when Saskia's voice changed from soothing to clinical, from wife to executioner. "Listen to me." Her tone shifted, businesslike and efficient. "The policy is $12 million, active since March 1st. Clean medical records thanks to Howell. No red flags, no suspicious health history. When she dies, it pays out within 30 days. $12 million is enough to pay the syndicate and disappear. Yes, but only if it looks natural." I heard paper rustling through the recording, followed by what sounded like pages turning. "Howell's facility handles it." Saskia continued. "Chemical sedation administered during what appears to be a routine wellness screening. The drugs mimic cardiac arrest, natural causes on paper, untraceable in a standard autopsy unless someone specifically tests for the compound. And they won't, because there's no reason to suspect foul play." Her voice carried the detached precision of someone reading assembly instructions. This was murder reduced to logistics. My death planned like a business merger. "Will it?" Corbin's voice was barely audible. "Will she suffer?" The question hung in the recording. My son asking if killing me would cause pain. "Does it matter?" Saskia's response came quick and cold. "She'll be dead, we'll be paid, and the syndicate gets their money. That's what matters. I need to know if." "Stop thinking of her as your mother. She's an asset. A $12 million asset that's currently wasted on someone who's going to die eventually anyway. We're just accelerating the timeline. June 18th, 8 days from now." The date hit me before Saskia even said it aloud. Some terrible instinct calculating the timeline from the context of their conversation. "June 18th, Saskia confirmed. 1 week from now. I've already scheduled the appointment under the pretense of a complimentary wellness screening for seniors. Forged her signature on the consent forms this morning." "This morning?" Corbin's voice cracked. "You already—" Yes, because unlike you, I understand that hesitation kills deals. The syndicate gave us until mid-July. That's 5 weeks. We need time to collect the payout, transfer funds, and disappear before they come looking. June 18th gives us exactly the buffer we need. Silence stretched. I could hear my own breathing in the quiet of my office, harsh and ragged against the clinical conversation playing through the headphones. There's really no other way, Corbin asked. His voice sounded hollow, defeated, but still asking. Still searching for an exit that didn't require matricide. She's worth 12 million dead, Saskia said. Alive, she's just in our way. The words were simple, brutal, mathematical. I waited for Corbin to object, to refuse, to say something, anything that would prove the boy I'd raised still existed somewhere inside the man who'd stolen my savings and forged my signature. Okay, he whispered. That single word destroyed me more completely than any of Saskia's clinical murder planning. Okay, not a protest, not a refusal, not even a demand for more time to think. Just surrender, agreement, acceptance. Good, Saskia said. I'll confirm the appointment tomorrow. You just need to get her there. Tell her it's a gift-free health screening, something thoughtful from her loving son. She'll believe you because she wants to believe you still care. I do care. Then prove it by keeping us both alive. The recording continued with ambient sound, but I'd stopped listening. My hands rested motionless on the desk. The trembling finally ceased. I'd spent 38 years loving that boy, raising him, protecting him. And in 30 seconds of recorded conversation, every memory turned to ash. My hands stopped trembling. The maternal instinct that had survived even the theft, even the forgery, even the syndicate threat, it froze and shattered when I heard my son agree to schedule my death like a dental appointment. All love for him died in that moment, replaced by something colder and infinitely more dangerous. That cold and dangerous thing was clarity. For one impossible second, I heard my son say no, and hope flickered like a match in a hurricane before Saskia's voice drowned it completely. The recording hadn't ended. I'd pulled the headphones off too soon, stopped listening before the conversation finished. Now I forced them back on, needing to hear everything, no matter how it destroyed me. Corbin's voice came through suddenly, raw and desperate. I can't do this. She's my mother. There has to be another way. The words hit me like a physical blow. My son, fighting back, refusing. Another way to pay back $6.8 million by July. Saskia's response was immediate, clinical. Tell me what that looks like. $6.8 million, not the $380,000 she'd mentioned earlier. The syndicate debt was nearly $7 million. We could sell the penthouse, liquidate everything. Corbin's voice gained momentum, desperation transforming into planning. My 401k, your investment accounts, the cars. And raise maybe $400,000 if we're lucky. Saskia's voice carried the patience of someone explaining basic math to a child. That leaves us $6.4 million short. The syndicate doesn't offer payment plans. Corbin. We could leave the country, disappear before. They'd find us. You know they would. Silence stretched. I heard my son breathing, heard him thinking, searching for any exit that didn't require matricide. That was different, Corbin started. That was a warning. Saskia cut him off. Marcus owed them $2 million. They found him in Vancouver 3 months after he ran. What they did to him took 6 hours. Do you want that to be us? I wanted to reach through time and shake him, tell him to run, to confess, to choose anything but this. Our assets won't cover 10% of what we owe, Saskia continued, her voice softening into something almost gentle. You saw what they did to Marcus. You saw the photos they sent as proof. That will be us in 3 weeks, unless you choose your mother's life or ours. The binary was brutal, perfectly constructed. No middle ground, no negotiation, no third option. She raised you, yes, Saskia said quietly. But she's 60 years old. She's lived her life. We're 36 and 38. We have decades ahead of us if we survive this. but only if you can do what needs to be done. There has to be. There isn't. I've run every scenario. Liquidating assets doesn't work. Running doesn't work. The only asset we control that's worth enough to save our lives is your mother's life insurance policy. $12 million. Enough to pay the syndicate and disappear properly. New identities, new country, new lives. Silence. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Before I tell you what my son said in those 12 seconds of silence, comment A if you think Corbin still has a choice here. Or B if Saskia has already won. Add one reason in 5 to 10 words. Please note, the next part includes recreated details for storytelling impact. The lesson is what matters. Then his voice returned, hollow and defeated, stripped of everything human. Okay, we send her to the border facility. Border facility. Their euphemism for Dr. Howell's unlicensed murder clinic. Good, Saskia's voice warmed, praising him like a teacher rewarding a difficult student. I'll call Howell tomorrow to confirm June 18th. When do we tell her about the appointment? His voice sounded dead. Not afraid, not guilty, just empty. Next week. Make it sound like a gift, complimentary wellness screening for seniors. Something thoughtful from her loving son who wants to make sure she's healthy for the move. The move she's not actually making. The move she won't live long enough to make, Saskia corrected, but she doesn't need to know that. I'd given birth to that voice 38 years ago, and now I listen to it agree to my death with all the emotion of ordering takeout. The recording continued with logistics dates, times, cover stories, but I'd stopped listening. My son had chosen. Between his mother's life and his own survival, he'd chosen himself, and Saskia had taught him not to feel guilty about it. Whatever love had survived until this moment vanished like smoke. And in its place, something harder crystallized the will to survive. The encrypted email notification chimed at 2:17 a.m., pulling me from sleepless vigilance to focused purpose. Vivica's financial forensics had arrived, and with them, the dollar value of my son's soul. I'd spent the hours since the recording ended sitting in darkness, headphones silent on the desk, mind cycling through rage and grief and calculation. Sleep was impossible. Instead, I'd organized evidence, copied the recordings to 3 separate drives, uploaded transcripts to secure cloud storage, photographed every document, every email, every piece of the conspiracy puzzle. Now Vivica's report appeared in my encrypted inbox. 47 pages with an executive summary that promised comprehensive financial investigation of Corbin Whitaker and Saskia Whitaker. I entered the password 16 characters, randomized, known only to me and Vivica, and the PDF opened. The formatting was clinical tables, graphs, source citations, legal disclaimers. Vivica had pulled credit reports, court filings, banking records, corporate registrations. 48 hours of forensic accounting distilled into documentary evidence of financial catastrophe. Page 1 Overview. Page 2 Methodology. Page 3 Core Findings. I stopped breathing. Saskia Morrison Whitaker, personally liable for $6,847,000 owed to Lakefront Capital LLC, a Chicago-based private lending syndicate. The footnote included links to news articles about Lakefront's documented ties to organized crime, their reputation for collecting debts through methods that skirted legal boundaries. The federal investigation ongoing since 2024. The debt originated from commercial real estate speculation. Saskia had leveraged personal credit and business loans to purchase 3 properties in Charleston's redevelopment zone between 2023 and early 2024, betting on gentrification driving values upward. When the Federal Reserve raised interest rates aggressively, her adjustable rate loans ballooned beyond sustainable payments. Property values stagnated, tenants defaulted. The cascade was predictable and brutal. By late 2024, she'd lost all 3 properties to foreclosure. But the deficiency judgments and personal guarantees survived. The banks sold her debt to Lakefront Capital at a discount. Lakefront imposed new terms, full payment by July 15, 2026, or face collection actions explicitly described in Contract Addendum 4B as extraordinary remedies reserved for non-compliant borrowers. I highlighted the number $6,847,000 and thought about how many wedding dresses I'd sewn in 40 years, how many hems measured, how many clients fitted, all while building a fortune they'd never bothered to investigate. The report continued with supporting documentation, bank statements showing Saskia's account balances approaching zero, credit reports listing maxed cards and collection notices, court filings tracking the foreclosures and judgments, a timeline showing how she'd hidden the debt from Corbin until December 2024, the same month he proposed. The same month, she researched insurance fraud on elderly family members. She'd married him for access to assets. Found only a middle-class engineer with a widowed mother living in a modest waterfront house. Recalculated. Discovered the life insurance angle. Recruited him into conspiracy. Page 43 contained Vivica's personal analysis, written in plain language instead of financial jargon. The irony is almost obscene. Your current liquid portfolio is valued at $145 million. You could pay their entire debt 21 times over and barely notice the withdrawal. They're planning murder for a $12 million insurance payout when the woman they're killing could write a check tomorrow that solves everything. But they never asked, never looked, never considered that someone living quietly might be living strategically. What do you call people who choose murder over asking for help? I sat back, the screen's glow illuminating my office in cold blue light. $6.8 million, the price of my son's conscience. The cost of Saskia's failed ambition. The debt that sentenced me to death. I could write a check tomorrow and erase it all. But they'd never asked, never looked, never considered that the quiet seamstress in the waterfront house might be worth more than their greed could imagine. Their ignorance was about to become the weapon I used to destroy them. I dialed Vivica's encrypted line at 6:47 a.m. with instructions that would transform me from target to predator in a single wire. Transfer. She answered on the second ring, voice alert despite the early hour. What do you need? Buy the entire debt from the Chicago syndicate, all $6.8 million. Silence. Then, you want to become their creditor. Her voice carried professional admiration, the tone of someone recognizing a brilliant tactical move. I'm not saving them, I said quietly. I'm buying them. They'll owe me everything, and they won't even know it. Vivica's response came quickly, her mind already calculating logistics. Lakefront Capital will sell if we offer immediate liquidity at a premium. They paid pennies on the dollar when they bought the debt from the original lenders. Offer them $7.2 million for the full portfolio. They profit $500,000 on the spread and eliminate their collection risk. Do it today. I'll structure it through a shell company, Nevada LLC, anonymous ownership, professional registered agent. When the transfer completes, you'll own every dollar they owe. You control the repayment terms, the deadlines, the enforcement provisions. And the threat provisions, I added. Those too, Vivica confirmed, though I assume you won't be sending anyone to Vancouver with power tools. I have better weapons. They were drowning in debt, and I'd just bought the ocean. Vivica promised to call when the acquisition completed. I hung up and sat watching dawn break over the harbor, calculating the next moves. The debt purchase gave me leverage, but leverage required revelation. The moment when Corbin and Saskia discovered their creditor's identity would be critical. Timing mattered, strategy mattered, and I needed to coordinate with the one person who'd been watching this unfold from the beginning. The unknown number called at 2:30 p.m. I'd been expecting it, somehow. The pattern of protection. The warnings timed perfectly. The familiarity beneath the electronic distortion, all pointing towards someone who knew me well enough to anticipate danger before it arrived. This time, the call came through as a video request. I accepted. The face that filled my phone screen stopped my breath. Hello, Constance. It's been too long. Vincent Ashford, 67 years old. was my late husband Harold's business partner, who had transferred his majority stake in their fashion corporation to Constance 20 years ago, creating her $145 million fortune while quietly monitoring her safety ever since. Silver hair replaced the dark brown I remembered. Lines etched deeper around his eyes, but the steady intelligence remained unchanged. "Vincent," my voice came out smaller than I intended. "You're the one who's been calling." "I've been keeping watch," he said simply. "Harold asked me to, before he died. Made me promise I'd make sure you were protected. That the equity transfer would give you independence and power when you needed it most." 20 years ago, when Harold's cancer had stolen him too quickly, Vincent had restructured their company ownership. I'd thought it was generosity, a gift from a grieving business partner to his friend's widow. Now I understood it was strategy. "I gave you those shares 20 years ago for exactly this moment," Vincent continued. "So you'd never be powerless against people like Saskia. You've been watching them. Monitoring, yes, through private security networks, financial intelligence services. When your son's credit activities started showing distress patterns 6 months ago, I flagged it. When Saskia's name appeared in connection with Lakefront Capital, I escalated surveillance. Vincent had been protecting me from the shadows for 20 years, building financial fortresses while I sewed wedding dresses and buried my husband. Why not tell me sooner? Because you needed to see it yourself, needed to gather evidence, build your own case, transform from victim to strategist. I could warn you. I did warn you. But I couldn't fight this battle for you." His face on the screen looked exactly as I remembered. Steady, protective, strategic. "I've been watching them plan your murder," he said quietly. "And I've been preparing countermoves they'll never see coming. You're not alone in this, Constance. You never were." The words settled over me like armor. Vincent leaned forward on the video screen, and I saw behind him the kind of office that managed empires, floor-to-ceiling windows, multiple monitors, the architecture of power I'd never needed, but he'd always wielded effortlessly. "Tell me everything," I said. "My intelligence network flagged Saskia's name when she started shopping for corrupt doctors," Vincent began. 3 separate unlicensed medical facilities within 2 weeks, all inquiring about backdated health assessments and falsified cognitive evaluations. Industry contacts and insurance and medical fraud investigation recognized the pattern immediately. Someone building infrastructure for murder disguised as natural causes. You've known for 3 weeks, since May 20th. The moment I traced the inquiries back to you as the likely target, I escalated surveillance to full operational monitoring. I've been documenting everything. Every email, every transaction, every lie. May 20th, before the forged eviction notice, before the staged fall, before I'd discovered any of it myself. "Why didn't you just warn me directly?" The question came out sharper than I intended. Vincent's expression softened slightly. "Because I needed you to discover it yourself. Build your own case. Become strong enough to fight back. You needed to choose this, Constance. If I'd simply told you your son was planning to kill you, you'd have tried to save him, protect him, find excuses. You needed to hear it in his own voice. See the evidence with your own eyes. Transform from mother to survivor." He was right. 2 weeks ago, if someone had told me Corbin was plotting murder, I would have defended him, made excuses, blamed Saskia entirely. Now I knew better. For 20 years, I'd thought of Vincent as Harold's partner, a business associate who'd been generous at my husband's death, but he'd been a guardian all along, watching from corporate towers I never visited. "What resources do you have assembled?" I asked. "Forensic accountants tracking every dollar of Saskia's financial fraud, criminal attorneys specializing in conspiracy and insurance fraud cases, private investigators with direct connections to both FBI white-collar crime units and local law enforcement." Vincent's voice took on the clipped efficiency of someone reciting operational readiness. "I've compiled a shadow case file that mirrors everything you've discovered independently: the forged signatures, the stolen funds, the unlicensed facility, the insurance fraud. Independent corroboration from a separate investigation strengthens prosecution exponentially." You've been building a legal case. I've been building an inescapable cage, Vincent corrected. The legal machinery is ready to deploy the moment you give the word. But I wanted you to have options. Control. Agency. This is your fight. I'm just making sure you have every possible weapon. My throat tightened with gratitude I didn't have words for. The debt buyout, I said. When does it complete? Tomorrow morning. Lakefront Capital accepted the offer an hour ago. They're getting immediate liquidity with minimal effort. The syndicate accepts the buyout tomorrow. Saskia's debt excuse vanishes. And the facility Dr. Howell's operation. Vincent's smile turned cold. Anonymous tip to the South Carolina Medical Board yesterday afternoon, backed by documentation of fraudulent health assessments and unlicensed medical procedures. The facility gets raided Friday. Howell will be facing criminal charges by Monday. So the June 18th appointment. Can't happen. The facility won't exist. And even if Saskia tries to reschedule somewhere else, the insurance company has been anonymously alerted to potential fraud concerns regarding any policies on your life. They'll scrutinize every claim with forensic attention. They'd built a trap for me, but Vincent had built a labyrinth around their trap. And every corridor led to consequences they couldn't imagine. Medical board closes them by Friday. Vincent continued. And I guarantee they have no escape. His face on the screen carried absolute certainty. They think they're hunting you, Vincent said, and his smile was the expression of someone who'd played this game for decades and never lost. But you're not prey anymore, Constance. You're the predator with unlimited resources, perfect evidence, and a 3-week head start they don't know you have. And I guarantee they have no escape. And I was about to watch them discover that truth in real time. Vivica's call came at 7:43 p.m. with the kind of urgency that meant events were unfolding faster than predictions. And I answered, already knowing the pressure campaign had begun. 2 collectors showed up at the penthouse 90 minutes ago, Vivica said without preamble. Before the debt transfer notification reached Chicago. What did they tell him? June 20th deadline, $6.8 million, cash or equivalent, delivered to designated account. Failure to comply results in what they called permanent collection measures. The security footage from the hallway camera shows your son, white-faced, hands shaking, begging for more time. I closed my eyes, visualizing it. Corbin at his penthouse door. 2 professional enforcers delivering the final ultimatum. His carefully constructed world collapsing into immediate terror. How long were they there? 90 seconds. They don't negotiate, they inform. Your son looked ready to collapse when they left. The timing was almost too perfect. The syndicate had sent their final warning hours before learning the debt had been sold, creating maximum psychological pressure at precisely the moment when Corbin's commitment to the murder plan would solidify from desperate option to absolute necessity. Text messages, I asked. Your son texted Saskia 13 times in 20 minutes. Our monitoring team intercepted everything. Vivica's voice carried professional admiration for effective psychological manipulation. He wants to run. Liquidate everything they have. Disappear before June 20th. Take their chances with starting over somewhere the syndicate can't find them. And Saskia convinced him the June 18th plan is their only survival option. The bugs caught every word. I should have felt guilt listening to reports of my son's terror, but 40 years of love had been extinguished by 30 minutes of recorded murder planning. Now I felt only the cold precision of someone dismantling a machine. Tell me exactly what she said. Vivica's voice shifted into quotation mode, reciting from notes. Running means they hunt us down and do to us what they did to Marcus. The 18th is 6 days away. We execute the plan, collect $12 million within 30 days, pay them off with $5 million to spare. It's the only play that keeps us breathing. $5 million to spare. Saskia was already spending the insurance payout, dividing it between syndicate payment and their new life. My death reduced to arithmetic. Corbin agreed. After an hour of back and forth, the final text from him was, "Okay, June 18th. I'll get her to the appointment." No hesitation in the wording anymore. No guilt, just commitment. The debt sale notification reaches Chicago tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., I thought. The syndicate learns they've been paid out. The pressure disappears. The June 20th deadline becomes irrelevant. When does the debt notification process, I asked, confirming timing. 9 a.m. Eastern. Lakefront Capital's accounting department opens at 8:30, processes overnight wire transfers first thing. By 9:15, the syndicate executives will know the debt's been sold and Saskia Whitaker is no longer their problem. But Corbin doesn't know that. He's committed to killing you for money that won't solve a problem that's already gone, Vivica confirmed. The June 18th appointment proceeds regardless. They're panicking, exactly as you calculated. They were rats in a maze, and I'd just removed the cheese while electrifying the walls. The recording devices are still operational. Full coverage, living room and office bugs transmitting clearly. Every conversation, every phone call, every moment of panic is documented. Keep monitoring. I want transcripts of everything between now and the 18th. Already being compiled. Vincent's legal team receives copies in real time. Corbin was terrified of the syndicate right now, texting Saskia in panic, recommitting to murder as his only escape. But tomorrow morning, the syndicate would learn their debt was sold. The threat would evaporate. And he'd still proceed to June 18th with a murder plan that solved nothing. They were panicking, exactly as I'd calculated, and every desperate move pulled the noose tighter. By Friday morning, the noose was visible to anyone paying attention. I rounded the corner toward my father's home office with coffee in hand, expecting another quiet Friday morning visit, and instead heard my stepmother's voice cold enough to freeze blood. Hadley, 16 years old, was Corbin's daughter from his first marriage and Constance's only grandchild. A quiet honors student who visited her father's penthouse every Friday morning before school. I stopped mid-step, pulse suddenly loud in my ears. June 18th, you confirmed with Howell. Saskia's voice carried through the partially open office door with clipped efficiency. Yes, my father's voice sounded hollow. Mom thinks it's a wellness screening. She doesn't suspect. Mom, he was talking about Grandma Constance. I pressed against the hallway wall, every instinct screaming that I shouldn't be hearing this. Good. After this, we're free. Free from what, Grandma? The tone wasn't about scheduling a doctor's appointment. This was something wrong. The facility's still operational, Dad asked. For now. My contact says the medical board's been sniffing around, but we're scheduled before any shutdown. Howell guarantees the documentation will be clean. Documentation. Medical board. The words didn't fit together into anything good. 12 million solves everything. Saskia continued. Natural causes, no questions. The policy pays out within 30 days. We settle the debt and start over somewhere new. 12 million. Insurance money. Natural causes. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. They were planning to kill my grandmother and make it look like she died naturally. I know, Dad's voice cracked. I keep thinking about when I was a kid. Sentiment won't pay the people who'll kill us if we don't deliver. Saskia cut him off. June 18th is 5 days away. We execute the plan. Collect the payout. Pay off the syndicate. It's done. That was my father's voice, agreeing to hurt the woman who raised him, the grandmother who taught me to sew, who called every Sunday, who'd never missed my birthday. Footsteps approached the door. I moved on pure instinct, backing silently toward the guest bathroom. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the coffee mug. The bathroom door closed behind me with a soft click. I locked it and braced myself against the sink. My reflection stared back. Pale, wide-eyed, terrified. June 18th, 5 days from now. A fake wellness screening at some facility run by someone named Howell. Insurance money. Natural causes. They were going to murder Grandma Constance for $12 million. And my father was part of it. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and opened the Notes app. June 18th, I typed. Dr. Howell, wellness screening, fake, insurance, $12 million, natural causes, Saskia plus Dad, planning. The words looked insane on the screen. Like something from a thriller novel, not my real life, in a Charleston penthouse on a Friday morning before school. But I'd heard it. Every word. Syndicate debt, I added. People who'll kill them if they don't pay. My grandmother was in danger from my own father. They were planning her death like a business transaction. And I was 16 years old with evidence nobody had asked me to gather. How do you save someone from your own father? I added more details Friday, June 13th, 9:15 a.m. Overheard in office. Saskia said, 5 days away. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Grandma didn't know. She thought it was a real appointment, thought Dad was being thoughtful, caring about her health. I had to warn her, had to tell someone, had to stop this. But who would believe a teenager accusing her own father of planning murder? I stared at the notes on my screen. Dates, names, fragments of overheard conversation. June 18th, Dr. Howell, 12 million insurance, natural causes. My grandmother was in danger from my own father, and I was 16 years old with evidence no one had asked me to gather. But I had to do something. I had to save her. The first thing she did was exactly what I would have done. She tried to save me. The knock at my door came at 2:47 p.m. Urgent, arrhythmic, the knock of someone too frightened to wait for an answer, and I knew before opening it that my granddaughter had discovered what I'd known for days. Hadley stood on my porch pale and shaking, eyes red from crying. Her school backpack still slung over one shoulder like she'd run straight from the penthouse without thinking. "Grandma, I need to tell you something. It's about Dad and Saskia." Her voice cracked on my son's name. I opened the door wider. "Come inside, sweetheart. You're safe here." She practically fell into my arms, and I guided her to the living room sofa, the same one where I'd sat listening to recordings of her father agreeing to my murder. Now I held her trembling hands and watched her struggle to find words for horror. "I think they're planning to hurt you," she whispered. "I heard them talking this morning." "Tell me everything," I said gently. The story poured out in fragments, visiting the penthouse before school, coffee in hand, voices from the office. June 18th, Dr. Howell, wellness screening that wasn't real, $12 million, natural causes, Saskia's cold voice, her father agreeing. They said June 18th a wellness screening, but Saskia said 12 million and natural causes. Hadley pulled out her phone with shaking hands. I wrote it all down because I was scared I'd forget something important. I looked at her notes, meticulous, dated, time-stamped. Friday, June 13th, 9:15 a.m. Dr. Howell, insurance, $12 million, syndicate debt. Saskia plus Dad planning. You wrote all this down. I didn't know what else to do. I heard them say, her voice broke, "Grandma, I think Dad is going to..." She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say the word murder about her own father. 16 years old, and she'd risked her relationship with her father to save me, not knowing I'd been planning his destruction for days. I pulled her into a hug, feeling her shake against my shoulder. "You were incredibly brave coming here," I said quietly. "Most people would have convinced themselves they misheard, or that there was some innocent explanation. But there isn't, is there?" Hadley pulled back, searching my face. "They really are planning to hurt you." I made the decision in that moment, protect her from the full scope while securing her testimony. "I'm going to keep you safe from all of this, sweetheart. You don't need to carry this alone." "But what about you? What if they really are planning?" "I promise you, I'm not in danger." I held her gaze, letting her see certainty instead of fear. "But I need you to trust me and let me handle your father." "You already know," she said slowly, reading something in my expression. "You already knew about this." Smart girl, too smart to lie to completely. "I've known for a while," I admitted carefully, "and I've been taking steps to protect myself. But what you heard this morning, that's independent confirmation from someone they don't know was listening. That's incredibly valuable. So I can help. You already have. But I don't want you anywhere near the confrontation when it comes. This is between me and your father." Hadley's eyes filled with tears again. "I don't want him to go to jail, but I don't want him to hurt you either." I know, sweetheart. She'd brought me a candle in a storm, not knowing I'd already built floodlights and mapped every exit. Can you promise me you'll be okay? She asked. I promise. And I promise that whatever happens, I'll make sure you're protected from all of it. I hugged my granddaughter and felt her shake with relief against my shoulder. You did right coming to me, I whispered, meaning it absolutely. She'd given me independent witness testimony from inside their home, confirmation of their timeline, and proof of conspiracy overheard by an innocent. I'd just gained another weapon I'd never asked for. And now I would deploy every weapon with surgical precision. After Hadley left, I spread every piece of evidence across my dining room table like a general mapping a final battle. Recordings, screenshots, financial reports, alibi documentation, and called Vivica to coordinate the endgame. She answered on the first ring. Everything in place? Almost. Walk me through tomorrow's timeline. The FBI agents arrive at 7 tomorrow morning. Vincent vouched for you personally. They're bringing senior investigators from the Financial Crimes Unit. I arranged the evidence into categories. Audio recordings with transcripts. Ilara's USB drive containing Saskia's emails to Dr. Howell. Vivica's forensic financial reports documenting the debt and fraud. My order logbook proving alibi on the forged signature date. And now Hadley's phone notes providing independent witness corroboration. And they understand this is attempted murder, not just fraud. Insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, forgery, and financial elder abuse. They're bringing arrest warrants for both Corbin and Saskia. Arrest warrants. The words should have hurt more than they did. What about Dr. Howell? State Medical Board raided his facility this afternoon. He's already in custody on separate charges. That closes their execution venue before they even know it's gone. I'd spent weeks as prey, days as investigator, and now hours as prosecutor. Each role shedding like skin until only the predator remained. The evidence organization continued past midnight. Each document indexed, each recording time-stamped, each piece of the conspiracy mapped with legal precision. Vincent's attorneys had prepared a prosecution brief that read like a thriller, except every word was documented truth. At 12:47 a.m., I sent Corbin a text. Can you and Saskia come by tomorrow at 8? I'm ready to sign the eviction paperwork. Easier to handle this in person. His response came within 3 minutes. Yes, thank you for being reasonable about this. Reasonable. He thought I was surrendering. I called Vivica back at 2:30 a.m., unable to sleep. They think you're signing the eviction papers tomorrow morning, she asked. I texted Corbin at midnight. He responded within 3 minutes, eager to finalize my surrender. They have no idea the surrender paperwork is actually a criminal complaint with federal jurisdiction. No idea at all. Vivica confirmed the debt transfer had completed successfully. Lakefront Capital accepted payment, released all claims against Saskia, and closed their file. The syndicate pressure that had motivated the murder plot no longer existed, but Corbin and Saskia didn't know that yet. They were still committed to killing me for insurance money that would solve a problem that had already vanished. The perfect trap, they'd proceed with premeditated murder for a motive that no longer applied, documented by recordings and witnessed by their own daughter, prosecuted by federal agents with unlimited resources. Get some sleep, Vivica advised. Tomorrow's going to be long. I will after one more thing. I hung up and walked to my bedroom closet, pushing aside the practical clothes I'd worn for 40 years of seamstress work until I found what I was looking for. The silk dress emerged from the back corner, wrapped in tissue paper that crinkled under my fingers. Charcoal gray with silver threading I'd embroidered by hand 2 decades ago, the week Vincent transferred the fashion company shares. That transformed me from widow to wealthy woman. I'd worn it once, to Harold's funeral, then packed it away because it represented power I'd never expected to need. Tomorrow I would need it. The fabric slid through my hands like water, still perfect after 20 years of careful storage. I held it up to the mirror and saw not the 60-year-old seamstress my son thought he could murder, but the woman who'd quietly built an empire while sewing wedding dresses. The dress hanging on my door was armor disguised as elegance, exactly like the woman who would wear it. I hung it on the bedroom door and stepped back. The silk dress caught the first light of dawn, charcoal gray with silver threading I'd embroidered by hand 2 decades ago. Tomorrow I would wear it to confront my son. Federal agents at my side, evidence irrefutable, power absolute. Tomorrow, no more victim. Tomorrow came. The doorbell rang at exactly 8 a.m., and I opened it wearing 20-year-old silk and 21st century power to find my son, his wife, and their lawyer standing on my porch with the confidence of people who believed they'd already won. Corbin looked tired but relieved. Saskia wore designer black, appropriate for a funeral they thought would happen in 4 days. Desmond Grayson, 54, was the mid-tier Charleston attorney Saskia had hired to handle the eviction paperwork, unaware he was about to witness his clients confess to federal crimes. "Mom," Corbin's smile was strained but genuine. "Thank you for being reasonable about this." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They crossed my threshold expecting surrender. Instead, they found Vivica standing by the dining room table, leather briefcase open, documents arranged with legal precision. And by the window, 2 men in dark suits with FBI credentials clipped to their belts. Corbin's footsteps faltered mid-stride. Saskia's confident expression froze, then cracked into confusion. Their lawyer stopped completely, professional instinct recognizing federal agents before his clients did. "Mom, what's going on?" "We're here to finalize the paperwork." "I know exactly why you're here," I said quietly. "Please, sit down. We have quite a lot to discuss." "Who are these people?" Saskia's voice had lost its warmth, turning sharp and defensive. "Special Agents Morrison and Chen from the FBI Financial Crimes Unit," Vivica answered before I could. "They're here regarding insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and elder financial abuse." The words landed like physical blows. Corbin went pale. "What? No. There's been some mistake." "Sit down," I repeated, and this time it wasn't a request. They sat. I remained standing, Vivica beside me, the federal agents flanking the room like bookends of justice. I watched the realization cross my son's face the moment he understood that the mother he'd underestimated had been 3 weeks ahead of him all along. "You've been listening," Saskia said flatly. "Not a question, an accusation." "Yes," I confirmed, "to everything." I pressed play on the audio system. The recording filled my living room with Saskia's voice, crisp and clinical through the speakers. "June 18th, you confirmed with Howell." Corbin's recorded response, "Yes, Mom thinks it's a wellness screening. She doesn't suspect." My son flinched at his own voice. The recording continued. "Howell's facility handles it. Chemical sedation, cardiac event, natural causes on paper." "Will it? Will she suffer?" "Does it matter? She'll be dead, we'll be paid, and the syndicate gets their money." 90 seconds of damning conversation played in absolute silence. Their voices discussing my murder with the casual efficiency of planning a business transaction. The June 18th timeline. The $12 million payout. The unlicensed facility. Dr. Howell's name. Every word documented, every admission preserved. Saskia had gone white, hands gripping the armrests of my antique chair. Corbin looked ready to vomit, his face a sickly gray that matched his trembling hands. Their lawyer had pulled out his phone, already texting someone, probably his malpractice insurance carrier. The recording ended with Saskia's voice cold and clinical. "Just let her die naturally, 12 million, no questions." Silence. The kind of silence that follows an execution. Complete, devastating, final. I let it stretch, watching them absorb the full scope of their exposure. Corbin's breathing had turned ragged. Saskia stared at the speaker like it had betrayed her. Their lawyer stood up slowly, already calculating distance from clients who just confessed to conspiracy to commit murder on federal recording. "That recording was captured on June 9th, I said into the silence, 5 days ago, in your penthouse, using surveillance equipment I planted during a visit." Corbin's eyes met mine. "You knew. The whole time." "I've known since May," I confirmed. "Every forged signature, every stolen dollar, every conversation about killing me for insurance money." All of it documented, witnessed, and presented to federal authorities with full legal standing. Saskia found her voice. This is entrapment. This is evidence, Vivica corrected, of crimes you committed against Mrs. Whitaker over a period of months. We have recordings, financial documentation, witness testimony, and forensic proof of fraud. Their lawyer was the first to break. In the 30 seconds after the recording ended, I watched Desmond Grayson's professional composure shatter like glass. First, his briefcase dropped, then his hands started shaking, and then his knees hit the hardwood floor. He stayed there, kneeling in my living room, breathing in ragged gasps. I only handled paperwork I didn't know about murder. Agent Morrison, the senior FBI investigator, looked down at him with the expression of someone who'd seen this performance 1,000 times. Mr. Grayson, you facilitated forged notary documents and fraudulent eviction filings. You knowingly processed paperwork designed to defraud an elderly woman of her property and assets. That's federal conspiracy, regardless of whether you knew the full scope. Please, Desmond's voice cracked. I can explain everything. I can give you names, dates, the notary who forged signatures. Saskia's sharp intake of breath cut through the room. Desmond didn't look at her. His survival instinct had kicked in with predatory focus, and he was already calculating the only trade that might save him comprehensive betrayal. Timothy Brennan, he said, words tumbling out desperately. He's the notary who forged everything. Licensed in South Carolina, but corrupt. Available for cash work. $5,000 per signature. I have his contact information. The payment trail. Text messages coordinating the forgeries. You spineless, Saskia started. Shut up, Desmond snapped, finding venom in his terror. You told me this was clean. You said the old woman wouldn't fight. You said no one would check the signatures. He was a rat abandoning a sinking ship, not realizing the ship was already underwater and he'd just traded drowning for a slower death. I'll testify to everything. Desmond continued, turning back to Agent Morrison. Complete cooperation. I have documentation proving the entire fraud scheme. Emails between Saskia and myself discussing the eviction timeline. Text messages about rushing the notary work. Payment records showing the $5,000 transfers to Brennan's account. Corbin had gone utterly still, face gray, watching his carefully constructed conspiracy disintegrate in real time. Saskia's hands were clenched so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Agent Morrison exchanged a glance with his partner, Agent Chen, who'd remained silent by the window throughout the confrontation. Agent Chen stepped forward, producing handcuffs from his belt. Desmond's eyes went wide. What no? I'm cooperating. I'm giving you everything. Cooperation is noted, Mr. Grayson, Agent Morrison said flatly. You're still under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and obstruction of justice. Your cooperation will be considered during sentencing negotiations. But stand up, please. Desmond staggered to his feet, legs shaking, as Agent Chen moved behind him. Desmond Grayson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, making false statements, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Click the handcuffs, locked. The sound echoed through my living room with terrible finality. Desmond stood there, hands bound behind his back, still trying to process that offering evidence didn't equal freedom. That cooperation earned consideration, not immunity. That confessing to federal agents in exchange for leniency still meant federal custody. Agent Chen guided him toward the door, reciting Miranda rights in a practiced monotone. Saskia and Corbin watched their lawyer, the man who'd assured them the forgeries were bulletproof, who'd promised the eviction would face no legal challenge, who'd helped orchestrate the paperwork fraud that enabled their murder plot, get escorted toward a federal vehicle parked in my driveway. The handcuffs snapped shut around Desmond's wrists with a sound like breaking bones. Saskia and Corbin watched their lawyer get read his Miranda rights in my living room. The first link in their chain had broken. and he'd given the FBI everything they needed to break the rest. The agent was still reading Desmond his rights when Saskia's voice cut through the room like a blade. It was Corbin. All of this was his idea. I only did what my husband told me to do. She stepped away from him physically, putting 3 feet of distance between them, like he'd suddenly become radioactive. The debts were his. The syndicate threats were his problem. I was terrified of what he'd do if I refused. Corbin's head snapped toward her, shock replacing the hollow defeat in his expression. "What are you talking about? You're the one who contacted Howell." "Because you told me to." Saskia's voice carried the tremor of manufactured fear, the performance polished but transparently calculated. "You orchestrated everything and made me the messenger. I followed your instructions because I was scared of you. Scared of the people you owed money to." Agent Morrison's expression didn't change, but I saw his partner shift slightly, hand moving toward the handcuffs on his belt. Saskia continued her systematic rewriting of history, voice gaining confidence as she constructed her victim narrative. Corbin controlled all our financial decisions. When his gambling debts spiraled out of control, when the syndicate started threatening us, he came to me with this plan. Said it was the only way to survive. I didn't want to participate, but he said they'd kill me too if I didn't help. "That's a lie," Corbin said, but his voice had lost its strength. "The recordings." I was scared of him. Saskia spoke over him, addressing the FBI agents directly now. "He said if I didn't help with the insurance fraud, the syndicate would kill us both. Every conversation we had, every decision we made, it was under his coercion." Agent Morrison stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitaker, we have recordings of you giving explicit instructions about chemical sedation protocols to Dr. Howell. Because he coached me. Saskia didn't miss a beat. He told me exactly what to say to Howell, exactly how to describe the procedure. I was terrified, just repeating his words like a script. I watched my son's face as his wife rewrote history to erase her guilt. The same expression he'd worn at 5 years old when he learned Santa Claus wasn't real. That innocence-shattering moment of understanding that people lie. "You planned all of this," Corbin said, voice hollow. "The emails prove." Those emails were sent under duress. Saskia interrupted smoothly. "I can testify to his coercion, his threats, the way he manipulated me into participating. I have documentation of his abusive behavior, witnesses who saw bruises." "You're lying." Corbin's voice finally found volume, desperation breaking through shock. "There are no bruises, no witnesses, no abuse. You controlled everything." But Saskia had already moved past him, was already performing for the federal agents like they were her salvation instead of her prosecutors. "I can provide testimony about his entire criminal network," she continued. "The syndicate contacts, the financial fraud, everything. I kept records because I knew someday I might need to prove I was forced into this. Sharks eat their own when blood fills the water." Corbin turned to me, and in his eyes I saw something I'd never expected to see again after hearing those recordings. Desperation for his mother to believe him. "She's the one who—" His voice broke. "I didn't want to. She said it was the only way." Too little, too late, and we both knew it. But I watched him stare at his wife, the woman for whom he'd agreed to murder his own mother, and saw the moment he understood that. Saskia had never loved him, never partnered with him, never intended to share survival. She'd used him like a tool and was discarding him just as efficiently. The final betrayal hadn't come from me, but it was about to. Corbin's knees hit the floor in front of me with a sound like prayer, his hands gripping my legs with the desperate strength of a drowning man reaching for driftwood that had already decided to float away. "Mom, please, please, I'm sorry. I didn't want any of this." His face pressed against my knees, tears soaking through the silk dress I'd worn specifically to remind him I was more than he'd ever understood. "Let go of me, Corbin!" I was terrified. The syndicate was going to kill us. I didn't know what else to do. His breathing came in ragged gasps. The composed senior operations director completely shattered into a terrified man begging his mother for salvation he didn't deserve. The FBI agents watched silently. giving us this final moment between mother and son before federal custody severed it permanently. "Please," Corbin whispered, "you have to understand." "I understand perfectly." My voice was steady, empty of everything except truth. "You chose to murder me rather than face consequences. They were going to kill us both." His grip on my legs tightened. "I had no choice. I was trying to save our lives." "You had choices. You chose to murder me instead of asking for help." "I couldn't ask you." He looked up, face streaked with tears and desperate sincerity. "You don't have that kind of money. The house, the shop. It's not enough to gem." "You're wrong." The word stopped him mid-sentence. "You're wrong about what I'm worth, Corbin." I looked down at my son clutching my legs and felt nothing. Not anger, not grief, not even satisfaction, just the cold absence, where 38 years of maternal love had burned away. "I own $145 million you never bothered to discover." His hands loosened slightly, confusion replacing desperation. "What?" $145 million, I repeated clearly. "On freshman equity transferred to me 20 years ago when your father's business partner retired. Carefully invested, quietly managed, completely invisible to anyone who didn't look past the modest house and clothes tailoring shop." Corbin's face went blank, processing information that rewrote everything he thought he knew. You have... He couldn't finish the sentence. "More than enough to pay your syndicate debt 21 times over," I confirmed. "Which I discovered 3 weeks ago when I started investigating why my son was trying to kill me." 3 weeks. "I've known about your conspiracy since May 20th. I purchased your entire syndicate debt last week for $7.2 million. You no longer owe them anything. The threat that supposedly justified murdering me has been gone for days." His hands fell from my legs. You bought... "I own your debt now. You owe me. And I know exactly what you priced my life at because I heard you agree to it on recording." I stepped back, forcing him to remain kneeling on my floor. $12 million, I said. "That's what you and Saskia calculated my life was worth. $12 million in insurance money that would solve all your problems and let you start over somewhere new." Corbin stared up at me, comprehension dawning in fragments. "So here's my offer. Corbin, you priced my life at $12 million and agreed to kill me for that amount. If you want forgiveness from me, pay that exact price." Silence. He had no answer. "I could have saved you," I continued, voice empty of everything except arithmetic. "Could have written a check that erased your debt, protected you from the syndicate, given you a fresh start, but you never asked. You never looked past your assumptions about the poor widow in the waterfront house. You chose murder over conversation." "Mom, pay the exact price you assigned to my life," I repeated. $12 million. Then we'll discuss forgiveness." Corbin stared up at me from his knees, understanding that I'd possessed wealth beyond his desperate imagination while he plotted my death for insurance money. He couldn't. He never would. And we both knew it. The lead FBI agent stepped forward while Corbin was still on his knees, producing in handcuffs with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd performed this ritual 1,000 times before. "Stand up, please." Corbin rose shakily, legs barely supporting his weight. Agent Chen moved toward Saskia simultaneously, who'd been standing frozen since the wealth revelation. "Corbin Whitaker, Saskia Whitaker, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and elder financial abuse." Saskia's voice found volume. "This is insane. I told you it was all him." "Place your hands behind your back." Agent Morrison continued without acknowledging her protest. Corbin complied mechanically. Saskia hesitated, then obeyed when Agent Chen's expression made clear that cooperation wasn't optional. The handcuffs clicked shut with sounds like doors closing. First Corbin's, then Saskia's. Steel around wrists, federal custody materializing from threat to reality. "You have the right to remain silent," Agent Morrison began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of constitutional formality. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I watched federal agents handcuff my son in my living room, and felt the strange peace that comes when justice stops being abstract and becomes steel around wrists. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Corbin's voice broke through the recitation, hollow and desperate.
Mom?
I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Agent Chen continued the Miranda warnings for Saskia, whose defiance had finally cracked into something resembling comprehension that her victim performance had failed completely. "Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you?" Agent Morrison asked Corbin. "Yes," he whispered. "Mrs. Whitaker," Agent Chen addressed Saskia. "This is yes, I understand, but this is a mistake." "Noted." Agent Chen's voice carried no sympathy. Desmond Grayson remained cuffed near the window where Agent Morrison's partner had placed him during the earlier arrest. 3 conspirators now stood in various stages of collapse in my living room, their lawyer terrified and sweating. Saskia's designer composure shattered into desperate calculation. Corbin broken into pieces I recognized but could no longer reach. The words of constitutional protection echoed through a room that had heard recordings of premeditated murder planned with clinical precision. "This way." Agent Morrison gestured toward the door. They filed past me, Desmond first, stumbling slightly, then Saskia, holding her head high despite handcuffs. Finally, Corbin, moving like a man in a dream. I followed them onto my porch. The morning sun was bright, unseasonably warm for June. 3 black federal vehicles idled in my driveway, their engines a low rumble that sounded like judgment. Agent Morrison's partner loaded Desmond into the first vehicle, guiding his head down with practiced care. The door closed with a solid thunk. Agent Chen walked Saskia to the second car. She was still talking, voice carrying across my lawn in fragments. "Complete misunderstanding. Coerced by my husband can provide documentation." The door closed, cutting off her performance mid-sentence. Corbin stood beside the third vehicle, Agent Morrison's hand on his shoulder. He turned, looked back at me standing on my porch in silk and silver threading. Our eyes met. I saw him searching my face for something, forgiveness, understanding, maternal love that would override justice. He found nothing. Agent Morrison guided his head down, eased him into the back seat. Slam. Slam. Slam 3 doors. 3 fates sealed. Engines shifted from idle to drive. Tires crunched on gravel. I stood on my porch in 20-year-old silk and watched 3 black federal vehicles carry away the people who'd plotted my death. The car doors had slammed like gunshots. Final and absolute. The ledger was permanently closed. They'd priced my life at $12 million, and I'd made them pay with everything they had. The payment was their freedom. Mine was just beginning. 2 hours after watching my son driven away in federal custody. I stood in my bedroom, packing a single suitcase with the essentials of a life I was choosing to leave behind. Photos of Harold, my tailoring scissors, the German steel pair he'd given me on our 10th anniversary, the silk dress I'd worn this morning, now carrying the weight of justice instead of grief. Everything else could stay or be sold. I didn't need the accumulated possessions of 30 years when I had resources to buy whatever came next. Vivica found me folding the dress into tissue paper. Vincent arranged the presidential suite at the Charleston Harbor Hotel. Stay as long as you need. I looked around the bedroom where Harold had died, where I'd spent 20 years sleeping alone, where I'd planned the destruction of our son's murder conspiracy. "I can't sleep here anymore," I said quietly. "Every room has recordings of him planning my death." "Then we leave now. The house can be dealt with later." I closed the suitcase and carried it downstairs, past the living room where FBI agents had arrested 3 people 2 hours ago, past the dining room where I'd spread evidence like a general planning war, past the kitchen where I'd drunk cold coffee and listened to my son agree to kill me. Ghosts everywhere. Hadley was sitting on the porch steps when we emerged, her backpack beside her, face red from crying. "What happens to me now?" Her voice was small, frightened. "Dad's in jail, and I don't know where I'm supposed to." I set down my suitcase and sat beside her. "You're with me, sweetheart. Not here. Not with them, but with me. College, future, everything." But Mom said, "Your mother and I will figure out the logistics. But I promise you, you'll have everything you need. Tuition wherever you want to go. Stability. Family that isn't poisoned by Saskia's influence." Hadley looked at me with Harold's eyes, the same hazel green, the same desperate hope. "You're not leaving me alone in this," her voice broke. "Never." Hadley hugged me on the porch, and I realized she was the only family I had left who wasn't in federal custody, 16 years old and the sole innocent survivor of our bloodline's implosion. "Go home to your mother," I said gently. "I'll call you tonight from the hotel. We'll have dinner tomorrow and plan what comes next." "Okay," she wiped her eyes. "I'm glad you're safe. Grandma, I'm glad you knew before it was too late." "You helped save me," I reminded her. "Don't forget that." She left on her bicycle, waving from the corner, before disappearing toward her mother's house 3 blocks away. Vivica loaded my single suitcase into the town car's trunk. I took one last look at the waterfront house, white clapboard, that needed repainting. The porch where Harold and I used to drink morning coffee. The second-floor window of Corbin's childhood bedroom. 30 years of memory contained in a structure I'd probably sell within months. "Ready, that?" Vivica asked. "Yes." Sessa. I stepped into the back seat. Leather interior, climate control, the architecture of wealth. I'd possessed for 2 decades without using. No more modest living. No more hiding power behind the facade of a seamstress widow. The car pulled away from the curb. In the rear-view mirror, the waterfront house shrank past, and grief and limitation reducing to something small enough to leave behind. The house looked like a museum of someone else's life, and I was finally free to stop being its curator. I was 60 years old, worth $145 million, and driving toward freedom for the first time since Harold died. The ledger was closed, but the story was just beginning. 3 weeks after watching my son driven away in federal custody, I sat in a new sewing room Vincent had helped me rent. Thread a needle for the first dress I'd made since the day I discovered someone was trying to kill me. The workshop was small, 1 room above a bakery on King Street, but morning light came through clean windows, and the sewing machine hummed like breathing again. Lavender silk pulled across my lap, fabric I'd chosen for Hadley's graduation dress. She'd graduate early next spring, and she deserved something beautiful, made with hands that loved her. Vincent had helped me find this place 3 days after the arrests. He'd also restructured my Maison Whitaker shares into a trust with better protections, arranged Hadley's college fund to be untouchable, and helped me sign a rental agreement that felt like signing permission to start over. "It's important to build new routines," he'd said. "Not to forget, but to remember you're still here." I was still here. That was the miracle. What is a mother without her child? If the child tried to kill her, I'd asked myself that question 100 times in 3 weeks. Thread it with my mind the way I now threaded needles through silk. The answer kept changing. Some days I was a woman freed from obligation. Other days I was a ghost haunted by the son I'd raised. Most days I was simply Constance Whitaker, 60 years old, still breathing, still choosing what came next. The bell above the workshop door chimed. Hadley appeared carrying 2 coffee cups and wearing the smile that had become my anchor. "Brought you a latte," she said, setting 1 cup on my work table. "How's the dress coming?" "See for yourself." I held up the bodice, lavender silk catching light. Her eyes widened. "Grandma Connie, it's beautiful." She'd started calling me that after the first week. Not Constance, not Mrs. Whitaker, Grandma Connie. Like family she'd chosen instead of family she'd been stuck with. It made my chest ache in the good way. We talked while I sewed. She told me about her college application's early decision to Parsons because she wanted to study design. I told her about commission requests I'd started receiving from Vincent's contacts, who wanted custom pieces made by the woman who'd survived a murder conspiracy. Morbid, maybe, but I needed the work. Then Hadley pulled an envelope from her bag. "This came to the old house," she said quietly. "The forwarding service sent it to me. I can throw it away if you want." I recognized Corbin's handwriting. Prison return address stamped in the corner. My hands stilled on the silk. Some objects carry more weight than their physical form suggests. The fake Ming vase I'd taken from Corbin's house sat on my workshop shelf now, a reminder that beautiful surfaces hide rot. This letter was the same a vessel that looked like reconciliation, but probably held excuses. Apologies designed to ease his conscience, instead of acknowledging what he'd tried to do. I could open it, read whatever justifications he'd written, let his words back into my life. Or I could choose differently. I took the envelope from Hadley and placed it beside the vase, unopened. "Maybe someday," I said, "but not today." She nodded, understanding written across her face. "You want to keep sewing?" "I want to keep sewing." She stayed another hour, and we didn't talk about Corbin or Saskia or anything that had happened. We talked about fabric and design and the future she was building. When she left, I returned to the lavender silk, to the dress I was making for someone who deserved beautiful things. Outside, Charleston moved through its afternoon. Somewhere across the city, Corbin sat in a cell, wondering if I'd read his letter. Somewhere else, Saskia probably plotted her appeals. And here in this small workshop above a bakery, I threaded needles and chose every stitch that came next. The greatest gift wasn't surviving their conspiracy. It was the freedom to walk forward without them. And to you listening to my story, remember this: your worth is not determined by how others see you. Looking back, I wish I'd seen the signs earlier. Don't make my mistake of thinking family loyalty means accepting betrayal. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. The heartbreak of losing my son to his own greed taught me that some battles choose us, whether we want them or not. This revenge story isn't about hatred, it's about justice. When someone underestimates you because of your age, your quiet nature, or your past, prove them wrong, not with anger, but with action. I believe God put me through this test to show that strength doesn't fade with gray hair. My revenge story became my survival story, and maybe my testimony can help someone else recognize the warning signs I almost missed. Real power isn't in what others think you can do. It's in knowing your own worth and defending it, even when it costs you everything you thought you loved. What would you have done in my position? Would you have fought back or walked away? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If this revenge story moved you or made you think differently about standing up for yourself, please share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel for more true stories of resilience and justice. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time and attention mean everything to me. One final note. While this story contains fictionalized elements for privacy and storytelling, the message and lessons are real. May you never need a story like mine, but if you do, may you find the strength to write your own ending.